Welcome back, guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Stayed with Mei During Her Forced Rest? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was a normal day as any other at UA High School, the school with the best heroics education in the country. It was quite the title to uphold in a world where 80% of the populace had special powers, referred to as quirks. The school held the most promising teenagers to shape the future as heroes, although the current students of the hero course had been through far more than the classes before them in much shorter of a time span. The sun was beaming brightly on this cloudless day, lunchtime had just begun, and one of the young boys that were assigned to Class 1A was sat outside by himself, his messy green hair being blown slightly by the gentle wind, as he enjoyed the peace and food alone. He was Izuku Midoriya, one of the hardest working students in his entire class. He was wearing a gray jacket with bluish-green stripes, a red tie and a white undershirt. He kept his bright red shoe-covered feet rested on the lower steps, as he tried to just enjoy the food that he had been given by the school chef, Lunch Rush. And it was as delicious as always. Even if Midoriya had turned to a healthier diet not too long ago, Lunch Rush made every meal taste like gold. The teenager normally sat with all his friends and classmates inside, however today he wanted to just enjoy the sunshine and peace. A day for Deku to be alone with his thoughts was a rare one nowadays, and he was happy with that fact. There were just some times though where he needed to hear himself think. That was what his teacher had taught him most after all. Izuku heard the door behind him open without any warning. He saw a familiar blonde friend that had a black lightning-shaped streak in his hair. Denki Kaminari, the electrical quirk user of their class. Oh hey there Midoriya. I was wondering where you'd gone off to. Kaminari crouched down alongside his friend. Honestly, most of Class 1A was friends with Izuku, heavy emphasis on most. He was just so innocent it made it hard not to be attracted to him. That strong aspiration of his to be a hero helped inspire those around him even. Ashe Kaminari, sorry. I was just feeling more like eating alone for lunch. Deku apologized. It wasn't like he was out here trying to hide from anybody or anything. He just needed to gather his thoughts. It was pretty normal for him to do every now and then. It had become far less common since he had been accepted into UA. Yeah, I get that. Sometimes I just skip lunch altogether and go wandering around when I need to think or clear my head. Charge Bolt responded. After another moment he stood up and began to walk away. I'll see you later, I need to check in with the development studio. Oh wait. Midoriya stood up when hearing the support course be mentioned, leaving his food behind as he began following along with his friend. Sorry, I wanted to check on the progress with my new equipment. Izuku apologized, barely able to hide how excited he was at the thought of getting new gear. The electric quirk user lightly laughed, shrugging it off. That makes two of us, let's go then. We only have 30 minutes before lunch is over. Denki agreed to let his green-haired friend come along. With how common explosions were in the support studio's workshop, having someone that was fast tag along made him feel a lot more at ease. Izuku wasn't sure why his classmate had decided to take the longer route to get to the support studio, though with how forgetful Kaminari could be, he simply brushed it off as nothing. The two could see the large doors that made up the entrance of the development studio of the support course students. They did not wait around before heading on inside. Midoriya was enamored with the studio. So many aspiring support gear creations were made in here. The support course existed to teach aspiring engineers how to create gear, modify or outright make costumes, work with various materials, everything one would need to develop support gear. Whether it was for their own personal use to become a pro hero, or in hopes to sell for a larger company. I don't see her anywhere. I figured she'd be asleep at her workbench again. Kaminari confessed, noticing the workshop was currently empty. Izuku had not even realized that until the actual silence set in. Normally by now the strong teenager would have been assailed with a dozen queries already by the support studio's glorified resident. You're right, and maybe she just went for lunch too? Deku suggested, though knew how much of a long shot that was. The person in question they were looking for rarely left the workshop unless they had to. It was what she was known in the school for after all. Nah, I didn't see her at all in the cafeteria. Denki responded. They both knew that their schoolmate would prefer to eat in the support studio and work as she ate instead of waste time on just eating in the cafeteria. Kaminari was disappointed. He had hoped about hearing an update on the item he had requested. Though the green-haired teenager was more so worried about the absent friend, that was just his unintentional state of mind though. heroism came naturally to him, but most of the time Deku put others before himself. While the two Class 1A students were in the support studio, they heard the sound of the door opening once again. They saw the support course teacher, the excavation hero Power Loader, stepping inside. "What are you two doing here?" Power Loader quirked a brow. Only one person was allowed to be in the development studio whenever they wanted to be, and she was the only one currently not inside. "We're sorry, Power Loader, we came to see Hatsum about the new gear we requested." Izuku apologetically bowed. Denki would have apologized too, but his classmates seemed to be doing enough of that for both of them. That and the support course teacher did not seem to mind, or at least he wasn't in the mood to scold them or even act stern. "Are you okay, Teach?" Kaminari attempted to query, becoming worried about Power Loader. At this point now Deku had even began to get a grasp on the demoralized feeling that was radiating off of the UA teacher. If he needed help, the aspiring heroes would more than gladly offer it. "I've had better days, either way you two aren't gonna find Hatsum here. She's at Hosu General Hospital," the support course teacher stated. The 1A students were shocked hearing this. What happened? Did she overwork herself again? Izuku worriedly asked, hoping their friend would be okay. Now he felt bad for disturbing Hatsum by adding on to her personal workload. "Apparently she was on a bus that got into an accident. She's awake, but I haven't heard anything else." Recovery Girl went on over to help treat her and the other people that had been in the crash. Power Loader explained all he knew. The two boys were horrified at the news. Midoriya had more than enough experience in the hospital to never ever want to see or hear about any of his friends winding up in one. "Oh crap," was all Denki was able to say. He was pretty bad at processing information as is and was not the brightest person as a whole. This had left him speechless, though. He had Hatsum to thank for him being able to control his electricity a lot more accurately after all. "Is there anything we can do to help?" the green-haired teenager offered without much hesitation. The support course teacher pondered it momentarily but nodded. "Yeah, if you can take her bag to her, I'd be grateful. I want to go make sure she's okay, but I still have classes to teach today. And it is a pretty important lesson too." Power Loader requested of the two 1A students, handing over Hatsum's bag to them. He had gathered it with the intention to deliver it himself, though Recovery Girl reassured the support course teacher that she would keep him informed and he did not need to cancel his lessons planned for today. "Oh, of course we will." Izuku agreed without even the slightest bit of hesitation, taking the bag. "Leave it to us." Denki nodded gladly too. "Thanks, I'll call to let Aizawa know what's going on. I owe you one." With that said, Power Loader went to another part of the support studio to begin preparing the next lesson for his students. It was apparent how concerned he was for Hatsum, almost in a parental fashion. Deku wanted to try and comfort the teacher, though before he could he felt Charge Bolt put a hand on his shoulder, motioning that they should leave the teacher alone for the time being. The two 1A students left the studio immediately. "Man, I was really looking forward to our next class too." Kaminari exhaled. The blonde was odd like that. He hated regular school stuff, but when it came to the heroic side of the learning coin he was more than enthusiastic. Deku shared similar sentiment to his classmate, though that didn't make him any less worried over Hatsum. "You can go on to class, I'll deliver her bag to her." Izuku offered to do it, seeing the electric quirk user look at him in surprise. "Really?" Denki smiled, looking more than happy hearing this. "Yeah, you can catch me up on the class later. I can tell you what I find out at the hospital." The green-haired teenager nodded, insisting it was no problem. He wouldn't be able to focus on class anyway right now. He always felt guilt-ridden when any of his friends were hurt and there was nothing he could do. It was just how Midoriya was at heart. "That's probably for the best, I'll let the others know. I'm pretty sure most of our class gets their new gear and costume upgrades from her." Kaminari said. That was when he saw the time, however. Lunch had ended 15 minutes ago. Aizawa was going to probably give them extra work for this. Good reason to be late or not typically did not matter to him. "Crap, I'll see you later. Good luck." With that said, Charge Bolt took off as fast as he could. UA being as big as it was probably did not help how late he was going to be any. "I wonder if this is everything Hatsum needs?" the green-haired boy muttered to himself. Someone as technologically and mechanically inclined like her would definitely get bored easy in a hospital. Everyone in the school that knew the support course member knew how often she worked after all. During his muttering, Izuku passed by a vending machine and stopped, looking over and seeing the several dozen various types of snacks within it. He had an idea sparked to mind, smiling as he went over to the vending machine. After a few minutes, Deku was outside UA's front gates and beginning to head out with the bag over his shoulder. He had gotten used to living in the dorms with his fellow classmates. It was an interesting experience that he doubted would be something he would ever be fully adjusted to 100%. Somehow that sounded all too familiar to himself. Izuku tried to ignore it as he began to make his way to Hosu General Hospital. A bus crash is pretty rare. Most heroes are pretty attentive when it came to watching roads too, especially for public transports. I wonder what could have happened. That muttering got Midoriya a good few glances from the people he passed by. This was just something the teenager had a habit of doing. When he got lost and thought he would mutter under his breath out loud, sometimes his inside thoughts would slip out as well. Needless to say, anyone that knew the aspiring hero knew this was his own personal trait. Izuku's brain was like a personal vault for hero knowledge. It was just how he grew up really. Being quirkless most of his life until recently, had made him view the world from both sides of the preverbal fence. Every day was another step toward his dream of being a hero after all, and he refused to give up on it no matter what. Deku was snapped out of his muttering when he realized he was already at Hosu General Hospital. Time flied when one talked to themselves apparently. He felt embarrassed realizing that once again he had talked to himself the entire way here basically. The aspiring hero brushed that off, and began to make his way inside. Going straight to the front desk at reception. Excuse me. Izuku spoke up, getting the person working behind the counter's attention. The green-haired teenager had a problem with that stutter of his. He always did it when he was nervous, worried, or anxious. It wasn't something he was born with either. I am here to see Mme Hatsum. Could you tell me where she is? Midoriya tried to ask, though that nervousness of his hit again. Whether it was because he was inside a hospital, which the teenager was never fond of to begin with, or because he was scared to see how hurt a friend was, it was making him shake a fair bit inside. One moment. The glorified desk jockey typed on their computer for a moment, before turning their attention back to the UA student. She was admitted not too long ago. She's in the third floor ICU. You can go up there. Whether or not they let you see her is the doctor's call though. The receptionist worker said. Izuku felt his heart sink hearing that Hatsum was in the ICU. Thank you. He managed to say before beginning to make his way towards the steps. The ICU? That's for really bad stuff. The green-haired boy tried to not mutter to himself, mostly staring down at his red shoes as he climbed up the steps to the third floor. Even Deku himself hadn't been in the ICU more than a couple of times. It was enough to make him loathe the intensive care unit out of fear more than anything. When Midoriya made it to the third floor, he saw it was a little busy. There had clearly been a fair few accidents today. He found it odd that so many had happened in short concession apparently. The teenager passed it off as simply being nothing but his imagination trying to distract him. There were a million reasons to be in a hospital after all. The 1A student was worried he would have to spend the time looking through all of the ICU for his schoolmate, though was relieved when he saw an all too familiar small elderly lady wearing a medical coat and pink-sided helmet that had a purple-tinted visor. Recovery girl. Ashe. Deku greeted the elder. She was the youthful heroine recovery girl. She was UA's school doctor, with a quirk that allowed her to help heal others. Due to said nature of her quirk, she tended to get around a lot to many medical facilities. Midoriya? What are you doing here? The elderly lady quirked a brow. She was just happy the teenager had stopped breaking his bones constantly. That was something she had refused to treat anymore after a certain point, until he had actually learned how to use his quirk safely. I came to bring Hatsum her bag. Can I see her? Izuku requested. The healing quirk user sighed. She looked exasperated at the mere mention of the support course member, yet nodded nonetheless. I'm still waiting for the results of her X-ray however. She seems fine so far. Recovery girl claimed as she led Midoriya along, the teenager simply listening as he followed. See, can you tell me what happened? I only heard that she was in a bus that got into a wreck. The green-haired boy asked, unable to really hide his curiosity. Recovery girl stopped at the door to one of the side rooms that usually were reserved for people that needed to be watched in the ICU, but not be held under intense constant vision. Well, that's all I told Power Loader so he wouldn't be too worried. Truth be told, a garbage truck hit the side of the bus and caused it to roll over 3 times. The youthful heroine described the situation. Deku stared in wide-eyed horror. An accident that big was sure to result in some bad injuries. We'll be able to release Hatsum if her X-ray scan shows she's fine. Otherwise she seems to have gotten really lucky. Recovery girl finished at that. Before the 1A student could ask any questions, he saw the healing quirk user motion her head towards the door of the ICU room that Hatsum was in. Are her parents not here? Deku questioned. He noticed a lack of people in the room. All he saw was an empty room, beyond a curtain that was partially pulled closed with Hatsum's all too familiar workshop boots being sat on the floor. That was all he could see though, no signs of anyone else being in there beyond the usual doctors and nurses presumably. They've been trying to get in contact with her parents ever since she came in. but they've had no luck so far. Well, you can go on in, I'll come back once we get the results of her scan. Recovery girl answered. Once she finished her sentence, she left Deku alone. The youthful heroine had a lot of people to try and help at the moment. Ok Izuku, brefi. Just stay calm and relax. Midoriya tried to tell himself mentally, a little mutter escaping occasionally. Being alone in a room with a girl other than his mom was anxiety-inducing in and of itself, but Hatsum was a whole different type of girl. Eventually the young boy got up the courage, based on the assumption that presumably his schoolmate would be too exhausted to be her usual self. He knocked on the door. Come in. The tone of that voice made him immediately know that he was completely wrong. Deku just shook his head. He opened the door and stepped inside the hospital room. Resting in the hospital bed, wearing a medical gown was the all-too-familiar girl with short dreadlock-styled pink hair and yellow irises that had a cross in the center of them. The 1A student had to pause for a moment. He was just surprised to see Mei Hatsum not wearing her steampunk goggles, and she looked pretty unharmed too, aside from the obvious scrapes and bruises given the incident. Midoriya? Mei seemed equally surprised to see him. She expected her teacher Power Loader to be here long before anyone else. Not that she minded, Deku was her favorite client after all. More so because of the challenges his quirk brought, though she saw it as him helping her skill evolve as a whole. Ashiyatsu? Sorry F for coming unannounced. Izuku apologized, though knew she didn't mind at all. The green-haired teenager felt relieved to see she was relatively okay. He had been dreading the worst during the entire trip to the hospital. It's always great to see my favorite customer. How's that new baby I gave you working out? Mai warmly replied. He felt bad upon hearing that question. She was the one that Deku would always go to whenever he needed a new support item or modification to his costume. A lot of 1A and 1B as a whole used the support studio, though the 1H student herself was the one they always went to. It blew up when I tried to use it. Midoriya shamefully admitted. A week ago he had requested the support studio to make him a new personal item based off of something he had witnessed from a certain friend, or rather frenemy of his own. Okay, well, that's my bad for underestimating your muscle baby strength. I'll get to work making a better one the second I get out of here. Mei gave an enthusiastic grin. She acted like she did not even want to be in this hospital. The teenage boy wondered how they stopped Hatsum from escaping at this point. And no, really, you always do great work. I brought your bag for you? Izuku immediately tried to change the topic, not wanting to see his pink-haired schoolmate make an attempt at a breakout before she was even given a clean bill of health. He rested her bag on the other chair nearby, before reaching into the side satchel of it. IB brought you something else too to lift your spirits. Deku claimed while pulling out the 3 chocolate bars, though doubted her spirits ever needed lifting. He had never seen the pink-haired girl demoralized in any situation, besides once, but he did not want to remember that incident whatsoever. You brought me chocolate? Mei's face was in his face in that half-second that he had looked away. The teenage aspiring hero felt his brain lock up on the spot when seeing those intense, practically sparkling eyes of hers. Hatsum had certain features about her that he tried his best to not focus on when seeing her. Even if she made shoving those thoughts of his into the back of his head a very hard task to achieve. After almost being knocked down by Mei, Deku was able to somehow get his brain together long enough to get her back in bed. He tried to give her the lectures he had heard a lot before himself, telling her how important taking it easy was, and, you don't know how bad the injuries might be, so you shouldn't stress your body. Izuku did not even care about the fact that he only intended to give her 2 of the chocolate bars. He had planned on keeping the 3rd one for himself since he had essentially skipped lunch during his attempts to see her. Obviously by now Hatsum had been ignoring him while she stuffed her face with the first chocolate bar like an over-enthusiastic child. Izuku found it, well, for lack of a more appropriate word in his mind, adorable. He always had that, along with many other thoughts cross his mind whenever he saw Mei, that passionate intent behind her work, that determination to succeed no matter what challenge was thrown at her, and an immense infatuation with what she loved most above all, inventing. She reminds me of myself. The 1A student muttered while having a smile on his face. Though he snapped out of his daze and looked up, noticing Hatsum looking over at him with a quirked brow. How much did I say out loud? Midoriya did not even try to deny it. He had a bad tendency to lose control of his inner thoughts, escaping when he muttered. Just this, she reminds me of myself part. Mei responded as she began unwrapping the next chocolate bar. Her hospital guest let out a sigh of relief when hearing that maybe his idol/teacher's lessons on controlling his inner thoughts better were actually working. I just get worried when you start looking at the floor. Usually it means something bad is going on in that brain of yours. the pink-haired girl stated as she offered half of the chocolate to her schoolmate. Deku blinked at that. He had many tics, but that was not one of them last he checked. Hearing Hatsum of all people admit to being worried about someone, when half the time she immediately forgot someone's name after they met, was surreal. Thank you. Izuku nervously said. He did not waste any time beginning to eat his own share of the snack. Though before they could talk further, they heard a knock on the door before it opened. Recovery girl stepped inside, alongside another doctor following behind them. Sorry for interrupting you too. The youthful heroine apologized. The other doctor that was with her looked uninterested in everybody as a whole. He was just there to do his job after all. Midoriya, can you please step outside for a minute? We have something we have to discuss with Hatsum. Recovery girl requested from the most commonly injured student, still being unable to decide whether or not she could add formerly to that or not. The healing quirk user was just happy when he stopped breaking his bones, or at least stopped doing it as often. Deku looked to Mei. She did not seem worried whatsoever. She still had that smile on her face, even if it looked a little slanted now, like it was fighting to droop in a nervous fear. I understand. Midoriya stood up. He was about to leave, but then he felt something grab his hand and tug him back. Ashu? When the green-haired teen looked, he saw Hatsum was holding his hand by the wrist, in a rather firm fashion too. That feeling, he recognized it a lot more than he wished he could. The support course student had a tremble in her hand, subtle or not, Izuku felt it. Her parents weren't here, nor was her favorite teacher, Power Loader. He acted like a glorified parent for her at times. The 1A student reached down and put his free hand on Mei's hand. He never thought he would sense that feeling from her. The feeling of fear, of uncertain terror. The feeling of being alone with bad news. One of the worst feelings he imagined in the world. Let him stay, Hatsum said while focusing on the two doctors. Deku was surprised to hear that. He saw Yue's doctor looking at them quizzically. Is it okay if I stay? Midoriya requested, more than aware that he should not be here. It should be her parents, her teacher, a classmate. He doubted he was the best fit for being in the current position. I'm not gonna argue with two of the most insane students of UA, Recovery girl murmured. The other doctor just stepping to the side where a light board was. He took the folder out from under his arm. They watched him put two X-ray scans on the light board before turning it on. Deku had no clue what he was looking at, and judging from her look, neither did Mei. The other doctor pointed to a certain part of the X-ray, hovering a finger over a specific part of the skull. You have a longitudinal fracture of the temporal bone, and it's not a small one either. It goes all the way down to your ear canal. Frankly, it's nothing short of amazing that you're conscious right now. The doctor claimed, apparently being a neurologist that the healing quirk user had brought along to help explain things. A skull fracture? Izuku could only repeat that in his head. He saw Mei had not stopped showing that bright expression of hers. She wasn't demoralized, she was awake and felt relatively fine at the moment, so she personally saw no need to worry. He hated that he saw through it with such ease, for even someone as over-energetic as her could not hide that nervousness behind that warm face of hers. It reminded the 1A student of himself even more, and that made him chew on the inside of his mouth in an effort to fight off those inner thoughts. Oh, I just banged my head? That's all? Mei responded, only to feel recovery girl's cane hit her shin and make her wince in pain. Izuku knew that pain all too well. How many times had he been on the receiving end of that cane before? It was weird to see someone else getting that treatment. This isn't just a boo-boo. This is serious. The healing quirk user scolded the pink-haired girl. Deku just kept quiet as he felt Mei's grip on his hand tighten in response to the pain. He would have said something but chose to remain silent, out of fear that he would get his own share of that cane otherwise. It was almost like dealing with an overbearing grandmother. The neurologist in the room seemed to be in the same mindset, almost like the youthful heroine was infamous for it within the hospitals she helped at. Can't you just use your healing quirk on her? Izuku asked recovery girl, wondering why they had not just simply done that from the start. After all, the elderly woman had repaired his busted bones dozens of times, and most of those times they wound up in far worse condition than Hatsum's head currently was in. That's where the second problem is. I've already tried using my quirk on her, 3 times actually. Recovery girl declared. She had treated everyone that came in from that horrible accident after all. Most of them were already discharged from the hospital by now. The 1A student quirked a brow, wondering why his fellow schoolmate wasn't healed then in that case. Is your quirk getting weaker with your age? Mei spoke with literally zero thought or hesitation. Izuku felt sweat running down his head when hearing her basically accusing recovery girl of becoming weak in the field she was professionally trained in. He felt more panicked when hearing age get brought up. That was something you never brought up around the healer. Ashatsum. I'll let her talk. Being witty won't make your head heal faster. Kakens taught me that. Deku interrupted Hatsum, hoping that his makeshift scolding would be enough to save her from another few cane whacks. The pink-haired girl rolled her eyes, reluctantly nodding. My quirk uses up the person's energy to heal them, that's why anyone I use my quirk on feels drained afterwards. The worse the injury, the more energy it takes. Recovery Girl began. Meanwhile, the neurologist she had brought along with her was just being patient to the side. He clearly did not want to be here. Izuku just focused on what the youthful heroine was saying since he doubted Mei was. Maybe I can explain it better by having you answer some questions. The elderly lady shook her head, guessing that would make it easier to explain than trying to argue with a stubborn patient. Hatsum, when was the last time you ate? She began the questioning. Deku looked at his schoolmate, and became immediately concerned when seeing her actually pausing to think on this. 5 minutes ago? Hatsum responded, feeling that nervous sweat herself now. Being around Midoriya so much lately was causing her to pick up some of his tics now. I meant real food, not junk food. The doctor corrected herself. There was silence initially. I don't know? The Zoom quirk user had a nervous grin now. Izuku held his head with his free hand, not even able to imagine what it was like living off of junk food alone. He wondered if that vending machine near the support studio was her primary source of nutrition. And when was the last time you got a real full night's sleep? I don't know. Now that smile she had was one of full-blown nervousness. Hatsum. Deku muttered. On one hand he was amazed, on the other hand, terrified by how she was still so awake given the multiple days without sleep. And when was the last time you slept in a bed, not at your workbench? Recovery Girl pressed further. It had only been a few months since Mei last came into the nurse's office at UA to get her back pain checked out after all. It was easy to find the cause behind that one. I haven't been to my dorm for a month probably. The pink-haired inventor felt that nervous smile of hers beginning to droop. She was trying to be optimistic, but hearing the questions and her answers side by side made it hard to be not nervous. You actually sleep in the workshop? Izuku stared at his close friend, mouth agape. He thought everyone saying that Mei lived in the support studio was a joke until now. It lets me get to work faster after my power nap. She tried to defend herself, very poorly if the 1A student's face was anything to go off of. Power Loader had given her permission to use the support studio whenever they wanted. She gladly took advantage of that offer too. And is it safe to presume you basically live off of canned coffee or energy drinks? Recovery Girl threw her last one-sided question out there, to which Mei gave hesitant slow nod. Izuku held his head with his free hand. The green-haired teen might not have registered it initially, but the entire time this conversation was going on Mei had been holding his hand, her fingers wrapped around his. He didn't mind, he figured she was just holding on unintentionally from when she stopped him from leaving. Izuku had no problem acting like her emotional support, especially given the circumstances. Well, that means we can't go with my treatment plan either. The neurologist said. This made the old healing hero feel annoyed, like it wasn't the best option available to begin with, even if the circumstances implored otherwise. What can we do then? Mei tried to make them get to the point. She understood what all those questions meant. It meant Recovery Girl's quirk would not heal the pink-haired teenager due to her lack of real energy. Mei's non-existent self-care did not help that whatsoever either. Well, since my quirk didn't work, the other plan was to perform surgery to have neural implants installed into your head. Usually those are only given to people that suffer from multiple concussions, but this is a severe injury. The youthful heroine began. The neurologist beside her nodded. He initially had been brought along to discuss that procedure as well. With that no longer on the table, he was just there to act as an assistant advisor at best. Why can't you do a surgery? Izuku hesitantly asked. By now that smile on Mei's face was gone, as if the gravity of the situation had set in finally. Or rather, she had given up trying to brush things off. Because she isn't healthy enough. Her body is lacking in proper nutrition, minerals and vitamins as well. Recovery Girl finished at that. All their options for quick treatment were not plausible. Deku swore he felt Hatsum's grip on his hand tighten. She was looking for comfort clearly, even if she did not realize it. In response, the green-haired teenager returned her hand squeeze with one of his own to silently reassure her it would be all right. So, the best thing we can do is assign Miss Hatsum here to 2 weeks of brain rest. We can clear that with the school easily, and after 2 weeks of proper eating, sleep and rest, she should be perfectly ready to have Recovery Girl's quirk used on her. The neurologist explained the best course of action available. The elderly hero nodded in agreement at this. What's brain rest? Deku had to query. He had never heard of it before now. It's where you try to rest and not do stuff that makes your brain work too much. Mei explained to her schoolmate, and her tone sounded miserable at the mere concept of it. Hatsum, sitting around and doing nothing essentially? For longer than 5 minutes? Midoriya could tell that was one of her greatest nightmares. He remembered when he got put on dorm lockdown for a few days after fighting with Bakugo. Those were some of the worst days he could remember, and would do his best to not have it happen again. Anyone who knew Mei knew what she was like. It wasn't really a short attention span problem, as much as she was just madly in love with creating her super cute babies, as she called her inventions. Although it did tend to take multiple visits to get her to remember the name of anyone she met. Izuku was just amazed she memorized his name after their second to third meeting. As she doesn't need surgery then? Deku could only manage to say those words. He sounded very relieved to hear that. Not unless things get worse. I'll handle the paperwork for her discharge. You can take Miss Hatsum straight back to UA. She'd probably be able to rest better outside of this hospital. The neurologist left on that note, leaving the 2 UA students and UA faculty member in the room alone. Do you want to wait for your parents? We've been trying to call them but they haven't answered yet. Recovery Girl offered to the support gear inventor, aware how stressful this all was and imploring how important it was for Mei to let her parents know what happened. Nah, I'll be fine. I can get back to UA on my own, Hatsum declared, getting out of bed before beginning to stretch. She had gotten stiff from being in that bed for what felt like ages. Izuku knew that feeling all too well, his hand now free from his schoolmate's grip after things had calmed down. His fingers actually felt a little numb. Midoriya's eyes shot open upon seeing how careless Mei had been when tying up the back of the hospital gown she wore. Out of his natural reaction, the young boy turned around and slapped his hands over his eyes with a bright crimson quickly creeping onto his face. It didn't help when he heard Hatsum begin to change back into her normal clothes either. I thought I had gotten better at not being affected by this ST stuff just by having Yaoyorozu for a classmate. Why is Hatsum changing right behind me? Does she just not care? Deku mumbled to himself under his flustered breath. He felt weak when it came to girls. The aspiring hero was not a pervert by any means, he just simply had no confidence when it came to social situations involving women. Well, at least one of you has decency. Recovery Girl commented to the green-haired teenager, not minding his muttering. Do me a favor. The youthful heroine's words made Izuku stop muttering. He looked down to her, more than appreciative of the distraction. Make sure she gets back to her dorm as soon as possible, please. This isn't a matter to take lightly. That injury can and will get worse if she doesn't take care of herself. Recovery Girl requested that Midoriya act as a personal escort back to the Hero High School. She knew she could trust him with that task. Why, you can count on me. He nodded. That sounded like an easy enough task. He was going to head straight back to UA the second he left the hospital after all. Taking Mei with him would be simple enough, he hoped. After a few minutes of feigning intense interest with a wall, and another few spent reminding Mei to sign all the paperwork needed to be discharged instead of just trying to flee the hospital the second she got dressed, the two found themselves outside the entrance of the building. Guess these are gonna need fixing. Mei sighed, looking down at the goggles in her hand. They had more or less been destroyed in the crash. Deku felt bad for her but knew she would have no trouble with such a simple task. Ich Hatsum, can I ask you something? Izuku chirped nervously as the two began the return trip back to UA. Hatsum nodded while she stuffed her busted goggles into her bag that was slung over her shoulder. Why didn't you wait for your parents to come? I'm sure they're worried about you. He asked. He knows if he got hurt his mom would be at the hospital within a few minutes. Deku couldn't deny, he was happy to at least see she had that same crazed smile on her face again. Oh, they were never gonna come. They'll get the bill eventually, then talk to UA's insurance staff. They'll both call me separately. I'll lie and tell them it's nothing serious and life will go on as normal. Mei answered her escort back to UA. However, the reply she gave made Izuku stare in a slight wide-eyed surprise. Do you not get along with them? Izuku hesitantly pressed the question past his vocal cords, one that he had asked himself many times before. He only got along with his mom, and that had its own history looming over them both. Izuku had never actually heard from his dad, outside of the occasional letters in the longest of times now ever since he went overseas for work when Deku was a child. Hatsum looked to him, initially unsure if Midoriya was being witty or not. Then she saw that innocent face and those cute eyes of his reminded her who she was talking to, the most socially awkward hero on the planet plausibly. The pink-haired teen had to ponder on that for a minute, as they came to a crosswalk and found themselves waiting for the lights to change. Was Izuku even capable of banter? Mei made note of that to test later since now she was curious, and curiosity was the greatest thing to her. Nah, they're just too busy for me. And that's fine. The only thing I need to love in my life are my babies and that's it. Hatsum replied with the smile on her face slightly weakened now. Her answer did little to make Deku less confused. Someone being too busy for their own child? He wished he could deny being familiar with that feeling. What? Why you got into UA? Made it really far in the sports festival, have helped most of the students in 1A and 1B, they must be really proud of you. I'm sure. Izuku claimed he didn't really know what to make of the only needing the love of her baby's part though. Mei found herself looking at him, that happy face of hers being replaced by one of surprise. She never heard Midoriya being serious like this, not in their times together at least. Midoriya? Hatsum simply said his name, that was enough to make him look down at his feet. As if the green-haired teenager was expecting a negative response based on that alone, Deku knew he could be as much of a worrywart as his own mother at times. His worry came from a spot of genuine concern for a dear friend though. Mei wasn't used to hearing anyone really talk to her like that. She hadn't many friends after all, or at least close ones. Ida usually held a dim dislike towards her, due to her stunt at the sports festival. Uraraka secret disliked her. Mei had no idea as to why as well. And she only remembered their names due to helping them a lot more recently. Power Loader was the only one to really show Hatsum anything resembling a parental bond. She treasured that a lot more than she ever let on, or would allow him to know if she could help it. Thanks, and you're probably right, but I don't want to talk about my family anymore. Plus, my head hurts too much to deal with that right now. Mei requested from her favorite customer, while expressing her gratitude to him for sharing some of that optimism he had. I understand really. Sorry I brought it up. Izuku apologized, and just like that an awkward silence took over from there. He would have asked more, then he remembered Mei was supposed to be resting her head, not dealing with internal conflicts or discussing stressful topics. That'd have the opposite effect. It wasn't long before the two arrived back at UA. Hatsum expected Midoriya to leave once they got past the security gate. To her surprise, however, he courteously and gladly escorted her all the way back to the support course members' dorm specifically. It was a 5-floor tall building, though the first floor was a common area. It was the same as all the other dorms. Thanks for coming to check on me and for bringing me my bag. I appreciate it. The chocolate was great too. Mei said to Izuku as they stood at the front doors to the support dorms. It was no trouble. I owe you a lot after all. Deku claimed nervously. As far as he saw it, she was the reason he had grown a fair amount in the last year. Because of her he even came up with a new style of fighting. That was what made him willing to put up with a lot of Mei's insanity. Pure, promise me you'll take care of yourself, okay? Midoriya requested. He wasn't trying to hide how scared he was for her well-being. Recovery Girl's words being more stuck in his mind than they were in his pink-haired friend's head. Hatsum wasn't used to having a boy fret over her so much. She never really had anyone worry about her health other than Recovery Girl and Power Loader before. The other support students tended to avoid Mei. She was very rough, around the edges. Her intensity tended to scare off potential friends rather easily. I'll try my best, but laying around and doing nothing isn't my specialty. Hatsum laughed, though she felt guilty when seeing those bright green eyes of his looking worried for her. It reminded her of a sad puppy actually. I promise. Izuku heard her assure him as he felt Mei's hand on his shoulder. He swallowed hard. The green-haired teenager wished he was used to the feeling of a girl touching him. Deku was more than happy to hear her swear to taking care of herself. He did not want her to wind up in the hospital again due to simply refusing to take a few days off from inventing. I better get going, and my next class should be starting. By Hatsum. Midoriya was able to stammer that sentence out, before he hurried off to get back to school. He had missed his class after lunch. If he was fast enough, he would be only really late for the next class. Mei watched Izuku as he left. Once he was gone, she turned around to make her way inside. She paused when she grabbed the handle of the front door. A thought occurred to her. Well, I did rest for a while in the hospital, and they did pump me full of medicine and painkillers by the time I left. Hatsum put a hand on her chin, oblivious to the fact she was muttering her thoughts aloud to herself. And he did say that the baby I gave him blew up again. It'd be rude to make my favorite customer wait half a month to get a new and improved one. She continued. After another awkward minute of talking to herself, she slammed her fist into her open palm upon reaching a conclusion. I'm healthy enough to keep working. I just can't work on the big stuff, I'm sure. And with that decision made, Mei hopped off the steps, and took off excitedly, running the second she hit the ground. She was heading straight for the support studio workshop once again. Here I come, babies. It had been a day since Izuku last saw Mei. He had gotten extra training when he got back to class the day after his punishment for vanishing and missing half of the school day without warning. even if it was for a good reason, but he welcomed that. Most of the 1A class were relieved to hear about Hatsum being alright for the most part. Midoriya having not gone into full detail with the situation as a whole. Right now, Izuku was sat at his desk, working on his homework already before he even was in his dorm was nothing unusual. Most of his classmates were clearing out already, several had made plans since the weekend was coming tomorrow. Though as the greenette worked, he heard a chair being moved and saw a pink-skinned arm suddenly reach over and close his book abruptly. Midoriya. A familiar upbeat and energetic voice spoke. He saw Mina Ishido, the acid quirk user with bright pink skin and horns sitting beside him, resting her arms on his desk. Ishido? Aki. Izuku was not good at talking with her, he got overwhelmed easy by girls as is with zero effort. Someone as energetic as Mina really exhausted his mental defenses fast. He appreciated Ishido's bright personality, she made entire rooms lighten up after all. So, I was in my room yesterday and guess who I saw outside my window running from the support course's dorm? Mina began gossiping, though with a small smirk on her face from the start of this talk. Deku gulped, he already knew where this was going. He had rushed to class yesterday after taking Mei to her dorm, only to find out he had been wrong about the time and outright missed the last class for the day. I know what you're gonna say, Ishido, and no, it wasn't what it looked like. Izuku replied, gossiping was one of Ishido's favorite things in the world. He was pretty sure her teasing him was a close second. There's nothing to be ashamed about. Kaminari came and told us all about how you rushed to the hospital to see her. I'm proud that you're getting braver with girls, and especially happy to see you taking the chance to get closer with someone. I've never seen a hospital visit turn into a date though. Mina giggled eagerly, clearly enthralled with the idea of the first romance of their class blooming. Deku cast a glance over to Denki, who was asleep at his desk like the second class ended he had succumbed to exhaustion. IIW went to take Hatsum her bag. That's all. Sure, I took her some chocolates tea to try and cheer her up, but that's all, I swear. Midoriya swore that he and Mei weren't an item, though the second the words left his mouth his brain finally caught up to what he had said. The green-haired teen felt a nervous sweat on top of his crimson blush as he saw that smug satisfied expression of Ishido's, like a cat that had just cornered a mouse it was toying with. DKU. For the first time in his life, the sudden booming rage-filled voice was one he was immensely relieved to hear. Mostly because Izuku was saved from his own rambling slip-ups. Mina pouted upon realizing her fun was over for the moment. A familiar ash-blonde-haired frenemy, Bakugo Katsuki, stood in the doorway to the classroom. His temper matched his explosive quirk's nature. Though the two had always been on rocky terms, lately they had been able to bond their friendship to a better status. It was almost like Katsuki was changing, though no one dared say that to him. It had especially become prominent as of late, however. Izuku nervously gulped when seeing his childhood friend unmoving from the doorway. Mina just tried to stay small since she really was not in the mood to hear his shouting. I need you to come with me now, get moving. I'm not gonna stand around waiting for you all day, Deku. Bakugo muttered the last part under his breath, though Deku never thought much on it. He stuffed everything into his backpack before standing up. I'll see you later, Ishido. Sorry? Izuku apologized for the sudden interruption. His horned friend waved her hand, insisting it was no trouble at all. In fact, she felt sorry for him. She watched as the two higher-scoring students in 1A left the classroom. What's going on, Kakin? Midoriya spoke, looking to his best friend as he followed along. Honestly, just hearing Bakugo admit to needing him at all was an extremely rare sight, one that the greenette gladly welcomed with enthusiasm the same way he would with all his friends in their school. There was silence at first, beyond their footsteps going through the halls and the voices of others they passed by talking to one another like any normal day. Is Uraraka still sick? I know it was your turn, but I haven't seen her in the last 2 days. Izuku tried to strike up conversation again, since his first attempt failed miserably. Their fellow classmate and one of his best friends, Ochako Uraraka, had gotten a bad cold and had been locked up in her room basically the entire time since. Usually whenever one of the 1A students got sick, they would all draw straws to see who would act as the caretaker until the person got better. Katsuki had been the one to take care of their sick classmate this time. Needless to say, he was not a fan of it. Roundface is fine, was all Bakugo replied with. Midoriya felt that awkward silence taking over again. See, can you just tell me what you need me for? It's not like I'll laugh. Izuku tried to reassure his dear frenemy. If he needed help with something embarrassing, then he would gladly do it without hesitation and with full secrecy. The ash blonde-haired teenager groaned. I don't need you for Jack, Deku. I just know you hate it when Raccoon Eyes starts messing with you. Bakugo retorted, adjusting his bag that was loosely dangling over his shoulder. Now get lost, I'm going to the support studio. Midoriya stood there in surprise. Kaken actually did something nice for him? Either he was in a really good mood or he was trying to use that as a way to pay Deku back for the lunch he paid for last week when the whole class went out into town. That was when the mention of the support studio registered in his brain. What are you going to the W workshop for? I thought Hatsum was your costume manager like me now. Izuku attempted to inquire while he began to follow Bakugo along once again. It didn't make sense to Izuku. Hatsum was supposed to be on brain rest for 2 weeks, so there was no way she was in the workshop at the moment, right? I asked Cross Eyes to make me something, to help with my new finishing move. She told me it was done when I ran into her this morning. Katsuki elaborated, not wanting to give all of the details away on the new attack he had been working on. Then again, with how observant Deku was, Bakugo thought it might be pointless to even try and hide it. I'll go with you, and maybe I can help W with your finishing move. Izuku insisted. He heard his childhood friend huff in irritation. Fine, just keep up, Deku. I'm not gonna slow down just because you're distracted. Katsuki told him, clearly just wanting to move on from the conversation about helping his friend out. And once again that silence took over. The two had always been in an odd relationship. Honestly, Izuku had been put through hell in his quirkless life, mostly because of Bakugo. They were inseparable as children. Unfortunately, when one got a quirk and the other didn't, that seemed to make things go off the rails. Deku felt like they had gotten better again in recent times. It seemed like Katsuki had been trying to make amends in his own unique way. It was slow, but he was happy nonetheless. Even if it took a few fights to get to this point. When they arrived to the support studio, it seemed pretty calm inside. There wasn't many in there at the moment. Most had already left by now to head back to their dorm or continue on with whatever plans they had for today. Hey, Cross Eyes. Bakugo shouted without warning. Deku could see Mei was on top of a ladder, working on one of her super cute babies. He was not worried though. He assumed that Hatsum was simply here tying up loose ends before she could fully relax those 2 weeks away for her injury. Hey there, explosive hair. I was wondering when you were going to show up. I've been waiting all day. Mei slid down the ladder and landed on her feet energetically. Hearing her mention being here all day sort of made Izuku worried. That didn't sound much like the brain rest she had been ordered to take. He tried to brush it off as simply there being too much for her to do today perhaps. Izuku really was just hoping she had not forgotten the promise she had made to him not even 24 hours ago. Here you go. A special pair of modified gloves just like you asked for. Hatsum presented them to the ash blonde-haired teenager, who took them with a quirked brow. They looked like Katsuki's regular gloves, except now with small metal cylinders on the fingertips and the palms. They seemed to be really small though, barely noticeable. These look like something you cook eggs in? Bakugo murmured in confusion. They didn't affect his movement whatsoever. He balled his hands into fists and opened them a few times, wondering if this was a dud. Katsuki had specifically requested something for his new finishing move idea. These did not fit what he had described whatsoever. Hey, don't knock them until you try them. I made these so you can concentrate your blast through your fingertips and palms when you want, without sacrificing your out-of-control explosions. Just like you asked. Mei elaborated to the anger-prone teenager. Honestly, Izuku was amazed to see the two getting along rather well. Maybe it was because Bakugo had no reason to hate their pink-haired schoolmate? Or maybe Bakugo simply respected her passion. Deku had no idea beyond the many theories in his head. It made him happy though. UHG? Fine. I'll go test them. Katsuki exhaled, going over to another nearby part of the support studio. It was like a small training arena. It had been made when some students had gotten impatient about testing their new equipment and did it in unsafe conditions. Deku still couldn't believe Mineta was permanently banned from the workshop like that. It was an impressive feat nonetheless. Aki, Atsuma. Izuku snapped out of his train of thought and went to the 1H student. She seemed fine so far. She was not acting any different than before as far as he could tell. Hey Midoriya. Sorry again about your last baby blowing up on you. I would have made you a new one already, but he was next in line. Mei pointed a thumb to Bakugo, who was still trying to get ready to test the gloves, mostly warming up by generating small explosions from his hands. Hatsum, I really don't mind waiting. Aren't you supposed to be resting? Why are you here? Deku requested an explanation. He was simply hoping that she was here to sort out some loose ends before taking the 2 weeks off. So far, his hopes were being dashed further and further each sentence she spoke. Well, I figured I was healthy enough to work. They filled me with tons of drugs and painkillers while I was in the hospital after all. I just thought I couldn't work on the big stuff. Hatsum did not even remotely try to bluff or lie about her thought process. She flexed her arms in a makeshift fashion like she was trying to jokingly show how tough she was. Ashatsum. You promised me you would take it easy. Recovery girl said you were everything but healthy. If something goes wrong you'll be in danger F from the injury A and even more FR from the surgery for it. Midoriya exclaimed, repeating what Recovery girl had said in response to that. He didn't even initially care that the Pinkette had broken the promise she had made him. Deku simply did not want her to wind up in the hospital again. Did you even tell Power Loader? Nope, I forgot. Hatsum admitted without hesitation with that same crazy expression of hers. Before they could continue their talk, their attention was grabbed by the sound of a larger explosion. Shut up over there. I'm trying to focus. Bakugo shouted at the two of them. He was more aiming his anger towards Deku, but he really did not need to hear the arguing when he was trying to handle a new type of explosive technique. Yeah. Just enjoy the test, you're gonna get to see baby number 1184 in action. Mei insisted, wrapping an arm around Izuku and pulling him to her side. The inventor was basically making him focus on watching his classmate. Feeling her touch made the green-haired teenager lock up on the spot. Her skin felt so soft despite all the grime she had on parts of her arms and face. Hatsum squishing him against herself did nothing to help Izuku's poor brain either. Katsuki aimed his fingertips at a few stacked-up cinder blocks that were set up in the designated testing area, as the support studio team called it. He took in a deep breath and focused, beginning to fire off a bunch of small explosions from all 10 of his fingers. Izuku watched in awestruck amazement as the cinder blocks were whittled down in a fast fashion. To top it off, Bakugo thrusted both open palms forward and rocketed out another pair of condensed explosions. They tore holes in the cinder blocks with zero effort as well. Mei had a proud smile on her face, seeing her invention working perfectly. Oh, that's amazing, Kaken. And now you can perform why your AP shot are really fast and easier W without having to use both hands. Izuku eagerly said he was happy to see Katsuki getting stronger. His friend had a special move that usually took both hands to use. With this new costume addition he could be far more lethal with less effort. I think I'll call this new attack AP Gatling? Thanks, Cross Eyes. Oh yeah. Bakugo gave a toothy grin, looking far more eager to try this new item of his in a real situation. Mei waved him off. Izuku still wasn't used to seeing Katsuki being openly happy nor friendly like this. It was kinda scaring him if he was being honest. This was a pretty easy one to do actually. I made you a whole box of the rings to replace broken ones in case you go overboard too. Hatsum stated as she motioned to a small cardboard box sat on the workbench. They watched as Katsuki continued practicing away. Izuku looked up and he swore he could see Mei analyzing her new babies in action the same way he analyzed heroes and their quirks. Well, she seems to be okay, I guess I'm just being overprotective again. Midoriya muttered to himself, or rather tried to keep those thoughts in his head and failed at doing so partially. Thankfully she did not seem to hear him. At the moment, Hatsum was using her zoom quirk to watch Bakugo basically blasting apart more and more of the concrete, turning it to dust at best. The testing area was suffering minimal damage from it as well thanks to the control the new modification the gloves offered the explosive quirk user. However, Mei was noticing something. Suddenly her eyes weren't zooming correctly nor to the same length. It was odd, one was zooming in a lot farther than she intended for it to and one was zooming out it felt like. Then there were the explosions she heard. The noise Katsuki generated didn't bother her at first, she made more noise than that every day, but now they were starting to become prominent in her head. That was when an abrupt sharp pain set in from the side of Hatsum's skull. She inhaled sharply and suddenly, while grabbing the sides of her head with both hands. Gah! Mei let out a cry of agony without warning and instantly fell over. Izuku was fast enough to catch her thankfully, trying to gently rest her down. Mai? What's wrong? Talk to me, Mei. Deku asked in a panic, not even aware of the fact he had called Hatsum by her first name by mistake. He was feeling that familiar crushing grip that was her hand tightening around his. Mei's eyes did not look right, like her quirk had completely gone out of control. H-head. Kikilink me. A hug. Hatsum could barely get that sentence out. She arched her back and grit her teeth hard when feeling another wave of pain suddenly shooting through her head. Bakugo had stopped what he was doing the second he heard screaming, rushing over to the unfolding affair. It was the type of sight he hated to see. Izuku was terrified by the spontaneity of the situation. It had more or less stunned him. There was no one else really around though. Power Loader wasn't there. and the few other support course members that were in the workshop after school ended looked more confused at what was going on than anything. Worthless extras. Bakugo chewed on his lip, stepping over to his frenemy and the pink cat. He went down on one knee beside them. Katsuki grabbed Mei's face with one hand, forcing her to look at him. Hey, listen to me. The explosive quirk user roared in an effort to get her attention. Deku almost instantly wanted to punch Kaken instinctively the second he saw him grabbing her like that, but he held back reluctantly. Mei was not able to respond through her pained whimpers. Neither of the 1A students had ever seen her like this before. I know it hurts. Focus your damn eyes on one thing, then concentrate on your breathing. Just keep squeezing his hand as hard as you can. Katsuki commanded Mei. She didn't know what to focus on exactly though. Her brain was all over the place. She was feeling panicked and terrified as her eyes darted all over the room. Hatsum was feeling the horror of the situation setting in. She even wondered if this was what death felt like at one point. And then, her eyes found Izuku's freckled face, those big forest green eyes of his looking down at hers in worry. They locked onto one another almost instantly. That face of his, one of a helpless hero. Seeing him upset or hurt were two of the things she disliked most, but that face of his, the one of uncertain fear, was one Mei felt oddly familiar with. Hatsum stared back up at Midoriya as he held her. Her zooming eyes began to calm down as she focused on her breathing. The pain began to vanish gradually along with it. Mei closed her eyes once her quirk was back under control. She was panting while her head rested in Izuku's lap. What just happened? Izuku gulped nervously. He looked up to Katsuki, who was looking equally stressed out and confused by the situation before them. Until Bakugo saw his childhood friend doing nothing, and snapped his furious gaze up at him. What are you looking at me for? Hurry and get her to the nurse's office now. Katsuki barked at his friend. Midoriya broke free of his surprise and nodded. He picked Mei up bridal style. The second she was in his arms, he ran out of the workshop with Bakugo in tow. Mei felt a lot better than she did a minute ago. The pain still lingered, however. She held on to Midoriya like her life depended on it. She had experienced pain before, sure, dealing with tons of explosions from her inventions tended to cause that. None of the pain from any of those came close to what this felt like. Deku felt terrible for not being more adamant towards her now. He left her alone yesterday because he thought Hatsum could care for herself for a simple period of time. The greenette mentally kicked himself for forgetting who she was at heart for even a second. The moment the two got to the nurse's office, Recovery Girl had them place Hatsum on one of the beds and forced the two 1A students to wait outside so they would not be in the way. Currently, Izuku was sat on the floor looking downright miserable now. Bakugo was leaned against the wall with his back and one foot pressed against the surface. So that's what happened, eh? Was Bakugo's response to hearing from Izuku what was wrong with Mei. The explosive quirk user had to admit he was impressed. Someone dealing with a broken skull, yet they continued working like nothing was wrong? It sounded like something he would do. I didn't know how serious it was you until today. Deku swallowed hard, not even trying to hide his worry. He didn't know how he would live with himself if Hatsum had sustained actual brain damage. Sure, her determination to keep working was the main factor behind this all, yet he still held himself accountable for not making sure she actually rested. As she's getting worse. Midoriya buried his face into his hands. However, before he could even let his depressive thoughts process any further, he suddenly felt a tight grip on his shirt and got yanked to his feet by his childhood frenemy. I'm only gonna say this once, Deku, so you better fucking listen, got it? Bakugo's glare practically pierced the greenette's soul. Deku slowly nodded, listening to what his classmate had to say. Don't go blaming yourself for something that wasn't your damn fault. Hatsum's a determinately stubborn girl, one of the most stubborn in school probably. She'd even give earlobes and round face a run for their money, I bet. With that said, or rather shouted to Izuku, he got shoved away as Bakugo released his grip on his school uniform before continuing. If you go blaming yourself for every last thing that isn't in your control, you aren't going to be a hero, you're going to wind up being just another worthless fucking extra like those morons in the support studio, who just gawked while all that happened. Katsuki finished with that declaration. Whether it was meant to be motivating or not, Midoriya felt genuinely better after hearing that. Even if his uniform was now a little worse for wear and trade. He noticed that Bakugo had not even taken off the gloves Hatsum had given him yet. Thank you, Kaken. Midoriya weakly smiled. His friend scoffed in response to that. The green-haired teenager decided he would try to press the topic, since now two queries were prominent on his mind. How did you know what to do back there? Deku quirked. He wanted to know how his childhood frenemy was able to take control of that horrendous situation with such minimal effort. It was almost like Katsuki had been through it 100 times before, the ash blonde-haired boy grumbled. If it'll make you shut up, it's some crap I read about in a medical book. There, you happy? Katsuki responded, trying to brush past the topic. Unfortunately, his friend was too observant and far too curious to simply allow that. A medical book? Why are you reading those? Izuku tilted his head quizzically. He thought medicine was something that was not interesting at all to Kekken. Sure, all heroes learned basic first aid, that was a given. Quirk-related medical situations were a lot more complex though, not something anyone could learn unless they went out of their way to do so. There were simply far too many variables and quirks in the world for such a challenge, at least for anyone without a healing quirk. That's what made most doctors' lives harder in the quirk era. Because Katsuki looked down towards his hands. He didn't seem angry, he seemed conflicted. He let out an exasperated sigh. I'm gonna fuck up one day. I don't want to be as worthless as most extras when I do too. Bakugo forced that sentence past his mouth before halting himself. Izuku wondered what was going on with his best friend. He had been becoming gradually different since he had come back from their last hero internship, where the students spent time with pro heroes to get a taste of real-world experience and to learn from those with far more quirk experience. Deku was unsure how to feel, hearing the explosive teen not being absorbed by his own self-confidence and ego for even 1 second was a terrifying aspect to imagine. Katsuki had mellowed out some in the last few months. Sure, that did not explain this abrupt change though. Before their conversation could continue, they heard the door to the nurse's office open and saw Recovery Girl standing there. You two can come in now. The youthful heroine informed the 1A students. They both nodded and gladly stepped inside to check on their friend. Deku wasted no time going straight to Mei's bedside. She looked a lot better now, but it seemed as if some pain was still lingering. The Pinkette's face showed it all. She was at least gathering herself quite well. It's a good thing you two got her here when you did. Recovery Girl commented. The two teenage boys had saved the 1H student a lot of pain. It would have gotten a lot worse if they had simply done nothing and waited. Thank you. Hatsum weakly expressed her gratitude to the two that stood by her bedside. Izuku had a reassuring warm smile on his face. The young boy instinctually took her hand into his own. He felt happy when seeing her safe once again. Don't thank me, Kaken is the one that helped get your quirk under sea control. Midoriya replied, feeling miserable for not being able to do anything in that situation. Thus he gave all credit to his frenemy. Whatever. Bakugo brushed it off, keeping his hands in his pocket just to hide the fact he still was wearing the new invention Hatsum had given him. Unfortunately, my quirk still isn't working on her. And worsening head pain is a sign that the injury is getting worse. Recovery Girl claimed, looking disappointed in Mei for not heeding what had been said just yesterday at the hospital. I gave her strong painkillers, but since this is a serious situation, I'm afraid I have to call Power Loader and the other teachers for a faculty meeting with the principal. The elderly healing hero declared, sounding sympathetic, yet there was not really any other option. Probably is F for the best. Midoriya wanted to argue against it, yet he gave in. He knew that it would not end well for Hatsum, and he could tell she dreaded the results of that as well. She had no choice though. She had to wait and hear what the many teachers and principal decided to do in response to the current situation. Bakugo just kept his gaze on the floor, annoyed though was feeling exactly how Deku did in that sense. Faculty meetings orientating specifically around one student rarely were good, if ever. Not that it was in bad taste, it just was that UA took extreme measures when it came to the well-being of their students after all. That was why they all lived on campus now, due to a few prior villain assaults on the many students. I'm gonna leave you three alone now, please make sure she doesn't make a break for it. Recovery Girl half-joked before taking her leave. She felt she could trust the two teenage boys. They seemed genuine at heart to her. I don't know what happened. I was using my quirk, then it wouldn't work like I wanted it to. Then the pain started. Mei spoke about all she could remember from back then as she remained laying on the bed. Don't worry about it, it's all okay now. Izuku reassured her. His thumb subconsciously was gently grazing over her hand as he held it. I didn't know they were that close. Bakugo thought to himself when seeing how the two acted together. He had to admit, he was surprised that Midoriya actually had gained the courage to even touch a girl without locking up like he did earlier in the workshop. Wait, he even called her Mei earlier. He realized upon the slight recollection of the incident. Thank you for helping me out back there. I guess I owe you. Does becoming a priority client sound good enough? Hatsum gave a bright toothy smile. Katsuki couldn't deny that expression of hers always hit his weak spot. I don't care, just pretend that it was me paying you back for the gloves if you care that much about it. Bakugo retorted, having to resist shouting since he did not want to risk bringing back the head pain with the usual volume of his vocal cords. I'm going back to the dorm, I'll see you later. Katsuki stood up and began to step away, like his job here was done as far as he cared. Despite the fact he wanted to stay, he knew that it would be better to leave the two alone for now. Hey, alright Kaken, I'll see you tomorrow? Deku nodded, knowing that his frenemy would most likely just go straight to the 1A dorms, scarf down something from the refrigerator, then go straight to bed. There was an awkward silence in the medical room initially. Neither of the teenagers knew what to say. Or rather, they didn't know what to say beyond the obvious at least. The Greenette hoped that Mei had realized the severity of her own injury after that painful episode. Then again, Izuku was reminded by himself that the last time he had that exact train of thought, Mei wound up going straight back into working on her babies with probably no time spent resting. I'm sorry. Hatsum suddenly broke the silence. Izuku turned his gaze up to her. He could see she was not looking at him, she was staring at the ceiling like she was very disheartened right now, or maybe embarrassed. If the teenage boy had to guess from his personal experience, it was a mix of both. I should be the one as saying that. Midoriya's response earned him an odd look from the support course member. She knew how overly apologetic the 1A student could be. That did not change how confusing it made him behave sometimes. He had nothing to apologize for as far as Mei was aware. Why's that? If it's because you had to carry me, I don't mind. I felt your body up so many times that I think we can call it even. Mei tried to jokingly retort, though could tell reminding Deku of that fact did nothing beyond try to force his poor brain to lock up on the spot. He had spent the entire run to the nurse's office trying to just stare straight ahead after all. And no, not that. I didn't mean that. Midoriya waved his hands defensively. He calmed down quickly when he saw Mei lightly laughing in response to his overreaction. What I mean is I shouldn't have left you alone like I did. It was irresponsible for me to do. An F for that, I'm sorry. Izuku swallowed, aware that it might come off like he was treating the 1H student like a child, but he did not want to hold back his true thoughts. It's not your fault. I'm sorry that I broke the promise we made the second you left me alone. Mei couldn't even deny how bad she felt for betraying his trust like that. If it hadn't been for Midoriya, she would have most likely been stuck in the hospital still. On the other hand, given the current circumstances, that might happen no matter what now. I don't care about the promise, I just want you to get better. Izuku blurted out with zero hesitation, catching her and himself off guard. Once again his mouth ran faster than his brain. Now Midoriya found himself staring at the floor nervously. Mei wanted to say something however, before she could the sound of a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. They saw the door open. They saw a few of the teachers of UA stepping inside behind Recovery Girl. Power Loader was the first to enter, then a black-haired man that looked exhausted or bored, or perhaps both, stepping inside shortly behind the support course teacher, followed by a blonde man that looked like a skeleton that had forgotten to die. I understand Power Loader coming, but why the other two? Mei quirked as she propped herself up on her elbows in an attempt to sit up. Izuku helped her up so she could talk to the teachers. He was close with two of them. The black-haired man was Shota Aizawa, the homeroom teacher for 1A. Because you're the definition of unpredictable, Hatsum. Power Loaded reminded her. It sounded like a half-compliment half-insult a parent would give to their kid. Like he was torn between being mad proud or disappointed. Greetings Hatsum and Midoriya. The skin and bones blonde greeted the two, being quite familiar with Izuku especially. He was Toshinori Yagi, the foundational hero studies teacher and formerly the #1 hero All Might. He was past his prime unfortunately. That didn't stop him from doing his best to teach the students of UA what he could. Even if he wasn't the best at teaching. Hi, All Might and Mr. Aizawa. Deku greeted them. To say he was All Might's #1 fan was an understatement, a huge one at that. He had inspired Izuku to become a hero in the first place, and helped change his life as a whole after all. Keep your voice down please. She's still recovering from earlier. Recovery Girl reminded Power Loader, who just nodded and took a seat. Aizawa and Toshinori seemed to be the ones primarily handling this conversation. The meeting's over and Nizu has given his decision. All Might began. They saw Eraserhead taking out a folded envelope and handing it over to Mei. She opened it up looking at it in shock. Wait. I promise I'll behave and follow orders. But this is a little extreme don't you think? Hatsum wanted to argue. The sudden movement however made her head throb in pain yet again. Midoriya made her ease back, trying to implore her to calm down with his reassuring smile. Calm down Hatsum, I am sure it's nothing. Deku assured, taking the piece of paper from her to view it for himself, beginning to read it over. All Might and Eraserhead let him do it. Normally the teachers would have either taken May away to talk to her privately about the decision, or asked the Greenette to leave so they could deliver it personally. But Recovery Girl informed them that the 1H student was going to request that the 1A student stay anyhow and that they needn't bother, something that Toshinori found rather interesting and noted for later. Izuku finished reading the letter's contents. He looked very torn now. It did little to persuade his guilt, even more so now. Aizawa yawned before guessing it was his turn to speak up. Out of all the teachers in the room, he came off as the one primarily entrusted with the news behind this task. On the grounds of intentionally hiding what could be a grave injury, refusing to obey direct orders, and on the count of, "Hang on, I think there's a smudge here." Aizawa had started, then stopped partway, looking down at the note in his hand. Power Loader glanced it over. "Nope, that number's right," the support course teacher said. He got a few questionable looks from the other two teachers for confirming this. And on 57 counts of destruction of school property caused by explosions, for just the last 3 months. Eraserhead crumpled the note up and threw it aside into the nearby trash can. Izuku felt terrible for May. The young boy currently was outside of the support course members' designated dorm. Hatsum was inside getting whatever she needed from her room while being escorted by Aizawa. Right now, the green-haired teenager was sitting on the steps outside, waiting to see the Pinkette again. Midoriya still remembered that face of hers when she was discharged from the nurse's office. They had zero hesitation to go through with this decision, and Power Loader was the firmest of the 3 teachers that had delivered the news. Deku could tell it hurt Hatsum a lot. Though they both knew that it was for the best, that didn't make the result any less painful. He wound up having to comfort her for a few minutes before they left. "Young Midoriya?" Toshinori's voice caught his attention and snapped him out of his daze. Midoriya looked up to the hero he idolized, unable to even really get a smile on his face. "Hey All Might, what are you doing here?" The aspiring hero quirked. He had thought All Might would have been busy making class plans for Monday. The blonde man had been trying to do better at teaching since he had retired from the hero life, especially when it came to the inheritor of what was once his quirk, One for All. All Might had not been in good health for a long time. He had never really imagined a successor before the incident, though he became completely serious once he had received an offer to teach at UA, and even more so once he had met Izuku. A quirkless boy that had a heart of gold and a mostly pure mind, the retired hero felt like his life had become brighter by a lot ever since they had become mentor to mentee. No, it was more than that now. It was like a father and son relationship had been forged. It probably helped that Izuku had admired All Might since he was a young boy. They had a long history together despite the short time they've known one another. They kept everything a secret for now. With how quick things were changing, secrecy seemed to becoming progressively harder as well. "I came to try and give your friend some words of encouragement. After all, we've all been in situations similar to hers before." All Might replied, trying to ignore the old memories of forcing himself out of a hospital bed the moment he regained consciousness after a near-death fight with his mortal nemesis. "Not being able to do what you love because of something that wasn't even your fault. It's not fair." Izuku exhaled, remembering those few days he spent on dorm lockdown after a fight with Bakugo. Those were some of the most agonizingly boring days of his life, and he would never wish to repeat them. All Might thought it might be best to change the topic to ease the tension as he felt it setting in on the conversation. "Speaking of love, how long have you and Hatsum been together?" Izuku's eyes darted open as he looked up to the grinning skeleton of a man before him. That red hue was back and glowing again on his nervous face. "All Might. And not you too. And me May are not together." Midoriya managed to get the words past his stutter. Today had been stressful enough. If Izuku wanted to be teased about his terrible capability around girls, he would go find Ishido. Midoriya my boy, you think I didn't see you by her bedside holding her hand while she tried not to cry?" All Might retorted, sure the man with messy blonde hair had no real experience in love himself, at least not until a few months ago, but even he wasn't blind to the obvious. May only was able to resist a full-blown breakdown because her green-haired schoolmate had been there by her side. Deku looked down, his hands held together as he tried to gather his thoughts. He was terribly embarrassed. That was when something sprung up in his mind. Ever since he had left May alone yesterday, Izuku had been unable to get her off of his mind. Sure, anybody would be worried about a close friend if they found out they had a major injury. But for the Greenette, he could not explain his thought process. Midoriya had been thinking about everything between him and Hatsum, all the way back from when they first met, to as early as today. All the times he had been blown up because of her, the hours he would spend trying to help her out. Then his mind started to drift off into the possibilities, the future. Imagining it made the 1A student as happy as, well, a child witnessing their favorite hero. That was the best feeling he could compare this to. There was only one way Deku could describe it. I love her. Izuku forced the words past his lips without even the slightest stutter. It was actually so sudden and shocking that Toshinori wound up, even coughing blood at the spontaneous confession. All Might, are you okay? Deku jumped to his idol's side. The UA teacher nodded, regaining himself after several more coughs. Why yes my boy, sorry. Your honesty caught me entirely by surprise. All Might grinned, slapping his successor's back. You're already stronger than me. I haven't even been able to say those words yet to the one I'm interested in, and we've been dating for 3 months. And no way All Might. You'll always be the strongest hero to me, and no matter. Wait, you have a girlfriend? The last of that sentence finally clicked with Midoriya's already barely functioning brain. Yes, and she is the most perfect woman in the world to me. She respects my history without letting it define who I am in her eyes. I'll make sure to introduce you one day when we're ready to go public. All Might claimed with bright smile of his own. Deku wondered who he could possibly be referring to. He had never really seen Toshinori spending time with anyone new especially. So, when do you plan to tell her? And just like that, the retired hero flipped the conversation back onto Izuku before the teenager could inquire further. Why you mean when do I plan to tell May I like her? Deku lost his bravery that came from the confession to himself. He was more than happy to admit that May had built his heart up like it was one of her very own babies. There were too many thoughts flying through his head though. He shook his head frantically. How you can go from being the most confident being alive to the most nervous in under a minute is beyond me. Toshinori held his head, doing his best to keep those words in his own brain instead of letting them out. They had been working on confidence in some of their newer training sessions. It was all over the place in terms of results to say the least. And why is that, Midoriya? He queried. Izuku looked away from the man he idolized. The two stood there in silence. Was he looking for an excuse? The 1A student wasn't the type to do that, even in the most uncomfortable of situations, unless an extremely mad about to snap Bakugo was involved, of course. Doi. Is there any room in her future F for me? What if she gets hurt B because of me? Would she even be safe? Deku exclaimed. That was his biggest fear, the future. He had no idea how strong he would be then. He had no idea what challenges would emerge to confront him. The greenette got anxious the more he imagined it. Not to mention his quirk was unpredictable. Several quirks stacked on one another, some of which neither of them even knew yet. Izuku felt his mentor's hand on his head. My boy, forgive me, but I do this for your own good. All Might spoke before pulling back a fist and suddenly bulking up without warning. Texas, smash. Midoriya felt a sharp punch to his face. It was hard enough to actually knock him down a few feet away from his teacher. And just like that, All Might was back to being extremely thin again. That was how long his powers lasted now, a few seconds at best. Oof. Izuku groaned as he laid there momentarily. He had a feeling that he knew why he had received that punch. The green-haired teenager held his now bruised cheek sorely. It was clear the former number 1 hero had not held back in that punch. That's a coward's excuse. Yagi decreed, stepping over to the inheritor of his quirk and reaching down to offer a hand to him. You're alright. Izuku put his hand into Toshinori's, feeling himself get lifted up off the ground back onto his feet. Although now he had a bruise to show for their talk. You're scared that she won't love you back, or that it'll make her choose between you or her inventions? All Might took a not-so-wild guess, seeing the inheritor of his quirk nod embarrassingly. As she's already dealing with so much right and now. Her injury got worse just from using her quirk. What if my confession causes her pain too? As she needs to think less not more. Deku spoke his true thoughts without a doubt. That being said, his inner fears were not hidden anymore, at least. He hung his head once he finished. Then simply wait for Hatsum to be healed before you tell her. It'll give you time to prepare yourself for whatever she does in response to it. Toshinori advised Izuku. Love was something you never wanted to rush into. He believed you could live without regret as long as you put enough thought into any decision. The retired hero never knew if this personal philosophy of his was correct or not. He had many personal experiences to go for and against it. Thank you, All Might. Midoriya bowed to his mentor, feeling a little better now. He had a plan, and the greenette always did better whenever he had a strategy. It was weird that he felt relieved after all that talk and a harsh lesson. Think nothing of it. I'll leave you alone now. If Hatsum needs support or words of wisdom, I'm certain you're plenty. Take care, young Midoriya. Tashinori began to leave after saying that, although he had no clue what was going on through his quirk inheritor's mind, the retired hero had faith Deku would handle the newfound love in his own unique bumbling way. Midoriya began to ponder things over to himself. He had to wonder, where was Hatsum going to go during her suspension from UA? The teenager knew that she did not have a good relationship with her parents, if what he recalled from yesterday was anything to go off of. May definitely would need someone to monitor her too. She needed to sleep well, eat right, take it easy instead of tinkering away and constantly working her brain when she needed to rest. That was when an idea sprung to Izuku's mind. At that moment he heard the doors to the front of the support course dorm open up. "What are you doing out here, Midoriya? I thought I told you to go to your dorm." Aizawa spoke up when seeing the greenette had been outside the dorm this entire time. The exhausted-looking man liked Izuku. He liked a lot of his students. But there was a reason Deku had the nickname, Problem Child. Izuku saw that May had a duffel bag dangling off her shoulder, and she looked miserable. It tore his heart up to see that expression of hers, though when her eyes set on his face she immediately hopped down the steps, landing beside the 1A student. "What happened to your face?" May questioned, reaching up and gently caressing his bruised cheek with her hand. It stung a little, but Midoriya did not flinch or lock up from the touch like he normally would. "Iya Mifine. Aizawa, can I make a request?" Izuku asked, looking up to his homeroom teacher as he stepped towards them. Eraserhead already had a feeling where this was going. He ran his hand through his black hair when recognizing that all too familiar expression of Deku's. "Did you think I could take a couple of weeks of absence, so I can help May recover?" Izuku made his request known, trying his best to not be nervous. Midoriya wasn't even aware of the fact he had been referring to Hatsum by her first name for most of the day. His brain was just saying what felt right naturally. "What?" Hatsum was stunned hearing this. She knew Midoriya had been worried about her, sure. The Pinkette never anticipated him being willing to give up weeks at his dream school just to spend time watching over her health. "And why do you want to do this?" Aizawa raised a questionable brow. Normally the homeroom teacher wouldn't even care or query. If it made his job easier, why should he care? However, curiosity was something even the secret cat lover could not resist. "Because I just want to make sure she heals. She needs more tea than just a plan written on paper to get better." Izuku was speaking from personal experience in that regard. He needed a lot of help to get stronger himself after all. If what Recovery Girl said was correct, then Hatsum had a long road ahead of her even if it was hopefully only 2 weeks. "Midoriya." May could only stare at him in awe. Eraserhead rolled his eyes. To him, sappiness was painful to watch, almost as painful as his girlfriend's puns. "Fine. I was assigned to find a proper caretaker for her anyhow. Go gather your things. You both have an hour to get off campus. I'm going to go tell Nizu." With that said, Aizawa began to walk away. He didn't care if this was just a convenient excuse for a young couple to be together. It made his job easier. He was happy. The pro-hero would have had to find someone to actually take care of Hatsum in case her parents were unreliable. He could at least trust the problem child with this task. "Thank you, sir." Deku called out, feeling a lot of relief now knowing he had been approved to help May with her recovery. "Are you seriously out of your mind?" May rhetorically spoke, unsure how to feel about this. She was very grateful, even if it was basically a partial insult from the green-haired teen. He was basically insinuating that she didn't care for her personal well-being, because everyone and anyone that knew the crazed inventor knew this was true. Even Hatsum herself. I'd say no, but... Izuku gave a sheepish grin. His friends and mom would definitely describe him as insane in the good way. The same way the 1H student was insane for creating inventions and upgrades to costumes while consistently blowing herself up in the process. Where were you planning to go even? Midoriya didn't beat around the bush for a change. It was a rarity for him to get straight to the point. The Zoom quirk user looked him over. "I guess my parents? Wouldn't be hard, slip in and spend 2 weeks there being a living ghost." May explained she didn't make it out to be a bad thing entirely, but she clearly wasn't enthralled by the idea. "It'll be like when I was a kid again," she added. Izuku chewed on his lip, processing this. He didn't know what to do really. He wanted to help. What could he do though? She couldn't go to a hotel or the sorts, and the 1A student knew his crush would not be able to really get any actual rest inside of a hospital. Deku didn't even want to imagine her being poked and prodded by doctors until she got a clean bill of health, even if UA had great medical coverage. "Would you feel better as staying at my home?" Izuku blurted out without warning that seemed to only surprise Hatsum. Further, a boy actually inviting her to their home? May never imagined anyone doing that in her whole life. She never had been interested in anyone, so to speak. She would have to meet his family then. It was a lot to take in. How could they even explain this? You're not just doing this to be kind, are you? May answered his question with one of her own. She saw the greenette slowly nod. I want to help May. It's my fault you had to deal with that awful pain today. Please let me take responsibility, not just as a hero, B but as your FR friend to help you. Midoriya tried to word it to the best of his capability. He felt Hatsum playfully punch his arm, that crazed smile of hers returning to her face. You are so corny. Fine, I'm all yours, Izuku. May gave her answer with an eager chuckle. Midoriya was happy to hear her agree. Now he could truly help her. It would be a lot of work, but he was confident that he could help her get better. Then what the 1H student said finally hit his brain, and then he felt himself try to lock up on the spot once again. Wait, what did you just call me? Izuku hesitantly asked, wondering if he had imagined it. What? You've been calling me by my first name all day. It's only fair I can start doing it back, right, Izuku? May hummed with that coy smile of hers. She loved seeing him look nervous like he did. It was adorable. Knowing Deku could go from brave to kind to scared all in under a few minutes was almost as fascinating to her as his quirk was. I have. I am so sorry, May dash. I mean Hatsum. Izuku felt his mouth running without thinking once again. He had been calling her May simply because it came naturally to him. Deku didn't even realize it until the inventor pointed it out. I didn't say I wanted you to stop. It's actually pretty nice to hear my first name for a change. Hatsum stated. That was relieving for him to hear, yet that statement felt like it was laced with a sad undertone. Before Izuku could reply, he felt her grab his hand and begin leading him along. Come on. I'm pretty sure we lost 20 minutes of our last hour here already, and you haven't even started packing your bags. May pointed out to him. Sure enough, the afternoon sun was beginning to go faster and faster as is. The teenager felt overwhelmed right now. He simply followed along, letting her lead. Izuku really hoped his mom would not be too mad with him. Deku had initially planned on having May wait outside his dorm while he grabbed his things really quick. Of course, nothing was that simple in his life. Hatsum had come right into the lounge area, and was just resting on the couch now. Power Loader's best student looked exhausted, both mentally and physically from today as a whole. Even if she tried her best to hide it. Nobody was around at the moment. Izuku just hurried to his dorm room to gather his things. He just really hoped May would be able to take a second off her legs without being bothered by any of the 1A student. Deku just grabbed what he needed to take home with him. Really, his dorm room looked like an all-might shrine with the memorabilia lining the walls basically. While the green-haired teenager packed his bag, he heard someone at his open door but did not take his attention away from the current task. Sorry May, I'm almost ready to go. Izuku spoke, assuming that it had just been Hatsum having come to see if the 1A student needed help or not. Deku, what the fuck are you doing? Bakugo's voice caught his attention. He looked over his shoulder and saw his ash-blonde-haired friend standing there. Katsuki had seen the two coming into the dorm. The explosive teen had been curious about what was going on. Deku was happy it was his childhood frenemy first at least. He doubted he could handle all their fellow classmates at once. Ashikeko. I'm packing my stuff. I'm going to be taking care of May while as she's suspended. Midoriya put it as simply as he could, more so wanting to focus on packing. This news did seem to surprise his friend. Seriously? You got a 2-week free vacation with your girlfriend? How the hell'd you manage that? Katsuki questioned. Sure, spending 2 weeks doing nothing sounded miserable to the explosive quirk user. Having to babysit May basically sounded like a challenge that even All Might would have run away from. As she's not my girlfriend. Izuku retorted instinctively. He threw his bag over his shoulder thinking that was enough. Anything else he needed he could buy later. The longer he spent in the 1A dorm the more likely he was to get caught in an embarrassing situation. Not yet anyway? The greenette murmured. Bakugo stared with his mouth agape. Did Izuku really just say that? He seemed more like the type to deny the obvious until he simply couldn't anymore. Maybe the one for all inheritor was changing. Well, good luck with that. What the hell should I tell everyone though? Katsuki snapped out of his stunned silence, just in time to catch his friend at the door. He only made that query because the others would definitely bug him to get answers. I don't want them to worry, Jay, just tell them that I got suspended T2. Midoriya shrugged. He didn't really mind what the others thought about it. The teenager had to go talk to some of his classmates for advice anyway before he left. Oh, like that won't make them worry? Katsuki shouted, getting no response. His friend was simply too focused on the task at hand to really care or put much thought into another idea. If you have a better idea then use it. Deku nodded. He left on that note since the explosive quirk user yelling tended to get other people's attentions. Bakugo just stood there, mostly confused by how overwhelming all of that was to take in at once. Good for him, I guess. I probably shouldn't tell Round Face. I'll let her figure it out herself once she's better. The blonde-haired boy shrugged to himself, guessing he should be proud that his rival was growing a spine. After that, Bakugo left the All Might Fanatic's room to get back to his own. Deku went downstairs. He had gone to one room in particular though. He had to talk to a few of his classmates to help answer some of his questions, or rather talk to the one he thought could help him with her vast knowledge. Izuku waited patiently after knocking on the door. It only took a second before it opened, revealing an all too familiar beautiful similarly aged girl to him. Momo Yaoyorozu. She was the smartest person in all of 1A, and arguably the most mature amongst the class of teenagers. Oh, hello Midoriya. Do you need something? Momo spoke in surprise. She rarely got visits from Deku. They were friends, not the closest though, more like acquaintances due to the hero course at best. They both respected one another a lot. Momo still remembered how fascinated Izuku had been in her creation quirk. Kriati had to confess, it had been very refreshing to have someone interested in her body for a different reason for a change. Yaoyorozu. I'm sorry to come when you're getting ready for bed. I just need to ask for your help with something. Izuku apologetically spoke. Yaoyorozu nodded, stepping out of her dorm room gladly. Vice president of the class or not, she was more than glad to help her friends. Is it about Hatsum? The onyx-haired girl asked. Deku held his head, feeling that nervousness setting in again. The greenette made a mental note to pay back the favor to Kaminari. Or maybe Mina was the one. Behind everyone in 1A knowing about Izuku spending a lot of time with the 1H student lately. Why yeah, she needs help eating healthier, and since your Q quirk uses your body's lipids, I thought you could give me some advice. Midoriya explained the situation, not going into much detail. He saw Kriati ponder on it momentarily. She never felt comfortable when talking about the active process behind her quirk. It just always felt awkward. Well, yes, my quirk does use my body fat to create the objects from it. But I'm no dietitian. Keeping up with my weight is a pretty easy task. I just mind what I eat at best. Momo responded, feeling bad she couldn't really help Midoriya out with this. The class vice president did not have much experience with Mei, though knew how intense she could be just from hearing other classmates talk. I see. I'll go then. Sorry for disturbing you. Midoriya apologized. He was about to leave. That was when a thought struck Momo. Deku wasn't even 3 steps away when he felt her grab his shoulder suddenly. I just remembered. I might have something that can help you. Yaoyorozu said. She smiled when seeing that cute face of his brightening up when hearing this. Really? The greenette eagerly asked. He saw the mature woman go to the bookshelf in her room, beginning to peruse through it for a few moments before suddenly pulling out a book. Sato gave me this as a birthday present last year. It's nice, but I'm no cook. Momo presented the book to Izuku. It seemed to be a custom-made cookbook with a ton of notes and placeholders in it. Sato was their classmate that more or less needed sugar to make their quirk work. He was a great cook too. The last time I tried to cook, I lit the stove on fire. Izuku muttered, not fond of remembering that incident. He took the cookbook gratefully nonetheless. Thank you. Deku gratefully told her. It's no problem. Good luck. I'll see you tomorrow. Yaoyorozu bid him good night before shutting the door. Izuku wanted to inform her that he didn't really plan on being around tomorrow, or the next few weeks actually. I better get going. With how slow I am, we probably have no time left. Midoriya thought to himself, just beginning to make his way downstairs once again. Though along the way he came to a halt when he passed a certain familiar door. It was Uraraka's room, the 1A student that had gotten a bad cold a few days ago. Bakugo had been taking care of her, as much as everyone expected it to go horribly. So far Ochako hadn't been begging for someone to trade out with the anger-prone teen for her caretaking, so they assumed that was a good sign. I wanted to ask her something too, but I don't want to wake her up. She's probably sleeping a lot too. Izuku murmured, guessing he could not really bother her right now. With that decided, the greenette just continued on his way down the steps. Maze needs to get healthier. All light on him, he supposed. Midoriya heard some laughter from downstairs, the voices being recognizable to him. Oh no. He picked up his pace and sure enough he found Mei was not alone on the couch. She was with Mina and another student of their class, Toru, the invisible quirk user. And that's how I burnt Power Loader's hair off. Hatsum just finished telling her story. The other 2 1A students seemed to be making the 1H student feel welcome to the dorm at the very least. That was when the pinkette took notice of her caretaker. There you are, Izuku. I was starting to think you fell asleep up there. Mei greeted him, Mina and Hagakure looking at one another in confusion upon hearing this. Sorry Mei, are you ready to go? Izuku nervously stepped over to her with his bag on his back. Unfortunately the teenage boy recognized that expression of Ishido's. Aw, you're leaving? I thought you were moving into our dorm. Toru stated, sounding saddened with this realization like she had just lost a new friend. Invisible Girl was very energetic, sweet, and helpful. It was sort of like she was still a child if her classmates had to be honest. Nah, just here to let Izuku pack his bags before we go to his dash. Mei didn't get to finish the sentence. Deku had zipped over with his quirk in half a second and covered her mouth with his hand, a clear panic on his face. You're calling each other by your first names now? Minaskvi e ogele. Ygis. Don't make a big deal of it, please Ishido. Midoriya more or less begged in slight embarrassment. He did not need Ishido gossiping that he had gotten a girlfriend before he had even made a remote move towards Mei in the romantic sense. Granted, Deku doubted the circumstances would help. Taking 2 weeks off from his dream hero school to help take care of Hatsum probably would fuel that a lot. As much as the green-haired teen was fond of the idea, he knew how much damage even just a simple rumor could do. Let's go Mei. Izuku insisted. The 1H student nodded, getting back to her feet and grabbing her bags. Mei seemed happier now, at least from talking to the other 1A students, even if she wouldn't remember their names in an hour or two. Was nice talking to you both, I'll see you later. Hatsum told them bye as she was taken away by Midoriya. The second the two were out of the doors, the acid quirk user and invisible quirk user looked confused. Where are they going? Isn't it almost curfew? Hagakure chirped. They would get in trouble if they got back to UA too late. I'll let the lovebirds have their fun, besides nobody has to know. Ishido responded, both oblivious to the fact they wouldn't be seeing either of them for a short time now. Toru just nodded, aware they'd wind up talking about it tomorrow anyhow most likely. Izuku and Mei now were outside the gates of UA. It was an odd feeling to them to say the least. Knowing they couldn't come back to the place they basically called home for a while was something devastating to even imagine. Neither expected it to really become reality. Even if one of them opted into said reality willingly. It's okay, those 2 weeks will fly by. Deku tried to reassure the Pinkette when noticing that thoughtful expression on her face. It was a drastic life change she had to deal with. If she didn't try to take better care of herself, then those 14 days will definitely increase. I sure hope so. Well, let's get going. Hatsum nodded, the two beginning to walk away from UA. There was an awkward silence amidst them both. Izuku was looking down at his phone, seeing the text messages he had exchanged with his mom earlier. Mei wound up leaning over to peek at it. Hey mom, I got some time off of school so I'm coming home today. Do you mind if I bring a friend over with me? They're sort of in a tight spot. Midoriya's text read. The Zoom quirk user had to admit she was uncertain about the thought of staying with a boy and his mother. Even if Deku was her favorite customer, she had no clue about his private life. Mei would feel awkward if it was a terrible family dynamic at home that she was intruding into the middle of. Really? That's great, Izuku. And of course it's been feeling so empty around here lately. I might be home late though, I had plans for tonight. I'll try to get back as soon as I can, okay? Was the response his mother had sent. Izuku seemed relieved and joyous hearing that. His mom just seemed happy to hear her son would be home from UA. Even if she had no clue how long, she was enthusiastic enough about it. Well, she sounds pretty sweet, Mei thought to herself, pretending to not have seen anything when Deku looked over to her. Is there anything you want for dinner tonight? Midoriya asked. He had no clue what the inventor liked, so he thought it might be best to ask in case they needed to make a stop on the way home. Do you have any cup noodles? Mei responded innocently enough. He stared at her with his forest green eyes. That uncertain smile of hers just waited for a reply. Mei, one of the things you need to start doing is eating healthier. I don't think cup noodles are the healthiest, even if that's the most I can cook. Is there anything more nutritious that you like? Izuku replied. The girl he had fallen for spent a fair amount of time thinking on this, to the point that he thought she might have abandoned the conversation out of embarrassment or shame. I don't know, I'm not sure what I like actually beyond chocolate. I mostly just eat junk food. Mei spoke honestly, seeing her caretaker holding his head. Okay, we'll figure it out together then, one thing at a time, right? Deku optimistically claimed. Hatsum just nodded. It seemed like their 2 weeks away from UA started officially tomorrow. I felt like I had my heart shattered after hearing that decision earlier, but with Izuku I feel like I'll be able to get through anything easily. Mei felt that train of thought run through her head. She still had a headache from the earlier incident. Thankfully it was easing off now. She wasn't even aware that she had unconsciously been trying to hold his hand until she caught her limb moving on its own. Hatsum was relieved when Midoriya didn't seem to notice luckily. The pink-haired teenager trying to distract herself by taking in the sights around them as they entered a part of the city she had never really been to before. It was nice out tonight, the sky was clear and the town looked pretty beautiful at night. A lot of eye-catching stuff that Mei never really got to experience. She always loved being in the workshop though had never really put much thought into what all she was missing doing the very thing she loved the most. Izuku is so sweet to me. What? All I do is blow him up or hurt him even when my babies work right. They need so much extra work to function for him the stronger he gets. And now here he is giving up half a month at UA for me? Hatsum pondered on this. Izuku's quirk made her task a lot harder and she loved that. She would always welcome a challenge. With all the harm she did to the 1A student though she had to wonder if he actually was some kind of saint being able to put up with her insanity to the degree he's been able to. Actually when Mei thought on it, she noticed Power Loader had been a lot more welcoming to Midoriya. She swore the support course teacher had even extended the rule of who was allowed in the workshop at any time to Izuku as well. By the time Izuku and Mei had arrived to the apartment complex that Midoriya called home, it was dark out. Initially the pink-haired girl did not really know what to think of it. The place seemed nice enough but no one seemed to be around at the moment. "Ha, so this is your home?" Mei chirped, looking around from the entrance after they had just stepped inside. The apartment seemed decent in size. It was nothing all that special although it seemed pretty cozy to her in a way she couldn't describe it. "Why yes, sorry if it isn't much." Deku apologetically spoke, surprised his mom wasn't home yet. Sure, she worked late sometimes. Her job was an odd one where the hours could range largely. The adult woman rarely was out this late though. The greenette guessed his mom wasn't kidding when she said she would be home late. "Do you mind if I use your shower? I'm still covered in oil and grease." Mei asked, as much as she wanted to just throw herself onto the nearby couch and rest. She knew at least basic courtesy in that regard. The 1A student nodded, pointing down the hall, though he felt his brain trying to make a certain image pop into his brain. He did his best to suppress it. "Sure, and Mei, you don't have to ask. As long as why you're staying here, this place is as much your home as it is mine." Deku responded to the pinkette, wanting to make sure she felt welcome in the Midoriya household, even if he knew his mother was going to make sure she felt more than welcomed when she got home. "I appreciate everything you're doing for me, really," Mei said with a sweet smile. She had to admit to herself, it was odd to be so warmly welcomed into a home that wasn't her own, mostly because she had never really experienced it before now. Though she knew it was going to take time to adjust to not being in the workshop, let alone not being in UA for a change. Hatsum stepped away, leaving her bags on the floor. "Oh my god, my brain is as corrupted as my net is." Deku held his head with both hands, feeling ashamed at imagining Mei in the shower. He legitimately had to catch himself at one point in that conversation because he almost made a very bad offer. His mouth had tried to move before his brain again. Izuku couldn't believe how intense his emotions were becoming now that he had confessed to himself that he did indeed have feelings for Hatsum. Midoriya tried to assure himself that he would be fine. Dealing with strong emotions was his specialty after all. Except dealing with depression was a lot different than dealing with lust, a harsh lesson the 1A student was learning really fast. "This is going to be a long 2 weeks. Midoriya exhaled, casting his gaze over to his own bag and was reminded of the cookbook Momo had given him earlier. "I need to distract myself. I guess now is as good of a time as any to try and cook," Deku told himself, trying to be confident despite his lack of cooking skills. Mei was in the bathroom looking at herself in the mirror. She was just waiting for the water to warm up at this point. The 1H student felt strange. Well, she felt a lot of things right now. She had no idea how to exactly explain it either. Hatsum had no idea why she felt nervous about this all. Spending 2 weeks with someone she enjoyed spending time with should be something that makes her completely enthusiastic. However, Mei felt extremely torn right now. Her grip on the sink tightening, scared, happy, overjoyed, depressed. That summed up some of the many emotions she had right now. The pink-haired teen recalling her home life in an unwanted comparison in her head between it and Midoriya's home. "I'm happy to be here, and Izuku seems even happier to help me. But do I really deserve it? Most of the time I just hurt him or blow him up, and now here I am basically intruding into his home." Hatsum muttered to herself, not even aware she was doing similar to the green-haired boy in terms of the murmuring. Mei felt guilty, like she had done all this, what felt like taking advantage of someone basically just to avoid going home at all. The inventor wondered why Midoriya cared for her like he did, when she did not do much beyond hurt him in trade. Even when her babies work right for him, it was a long and hard road to make them suitable to Deku's ever-growing strength, even longer with the constant tune-ups, repairs and rebuilding. "Stop thinking so much." Mei suddenly shook herself out of her train of thought, reminding herself that she was meant to be resting her brain, not making it work more. Even if the 1H student felt that was an incredibly hard task for herself, the pinkette simply stepped away from the mirror, her cross-shaped irises giving one last glance to the reflection, as if she was having trouble breaking free from the thoughts. By the time Hatsum had finished cleaning herself up, Midoriya had completed making dinner, or rather his best attempt at it. All she saw as she dried her hair off was what looked like a relatively simple rice salad. But judging by the state of the kitchen stove, sink, and Izuku's aura of sheer shame, this dish had been the only thing to survive out of the kitchen. "So, you blow up kitchens the same way I blow up the workshop, huh?" Mei laughed. Her caretaker exhaled as he nodded in agreement. Hatsum was just amazed he managed to do all this in the half hour she spent in the bathroom. "I tried to make dessert too. I don't know what happened, I looked away for half a second and then there was a water overflowing from the pot on the stove and then—" Izuku got cut off mid-sentence when feeling the pinkette give him a one-armed hug, pulling him into herself. There, it's okay. I know your pain." Mei stroked Deku's head comfortingly. They were both bad in the cooking area. Although at the moment Midoriya was locked up on the spot, once again the 1H student broke his brain with minimal effort. He had to confess, it was odd to not smell grease and machine gunk coming off of Mei for a change. Izuku calmed down relatively fast though, feeling Mei's hand running through his hair felt very nice to him. He didn't think he would ever see the inventor without her gloves on in his life, but guessed she saw no point in wearing them at the moment. Thank you," was all Izuku could get out, wanting to enjoy the moment for all it was worth. He would ask if she wanted to try and cook something herself. Honestly though he did not want to gamble on the appliance's survivability any further tonight. Besides, this looks alright so far. Let's eat. Hatsum tried to be optimistic. Trying new foods certainly was going to be an odd experience. She hoped it would be a straightforward enough one. "I've never had rice like this before though." "Really? I probably would have burnt it if it wasn't for the cooker on the counter," Deku replied, letting Mei take her seat at the small kitchen table to enjoy what little dinner there was to be had. The aspiring hero was about to dig in himself, however his attention got grabbed by his phone alert tone going off once again. "Must be mom again," Izuku murmured, taking his cell phone out to read the text message. "Izuku dear, I'm not going to make it home tonight. I lost track of time and will be spending the night at a friend's house. I'll make it up to you tomorrow, and I know you probably already have, but make sure you help your friend get settled in." The text message from Inko read. Izuku had never heard of his mom staying out like that before. It was weird, but he didn't put much thought into it since she more than deserved to have fun as far as Deku cared. "Is the food okay?" Midoriya quirked. When he put his phone away and looked up, he saw Mei was eating her portion pretty fast. It was like she had never had anything like it before, which confused him a little considering he had messed up everything else in the kitchen. The pinkette lowered her chopsticks for a second, swallowing what she had in her mouth. "Nope, it tastes really sour," Mei declared with that same crazy smile of hers. The greenette raised an eyebrow when hearing that. He wondered if she was just mistaken at first, so Izuku ate some of his share of the food. It was indeed very sour. It was tolerable in terms of taste otherwise, yet that didn't change Midoriya's confusion on how this even happened to begin with. This is bad. Do you like sour stuff?" The 1A student asked the girl with the damaged skull, not sure how Mei would be able to stomach this otherwise. She paused briefly. "I thought this was just what healthy stuff tasted like. So, I was kind of forcing myself to just eat it. Seeing how hard you worked on it helped too," Hatsum confessed with a sheepish smile. As sweet as that sounded, the teenage boy shook his head. "No, trust me, healthy food has just as much flavor to it as any other kind of food," Izuku replied, guessing that made dinner tonight a massive letdown. Midoriya felt embarrassed, unsure why, but guessed it was because he was trying to feed someone other than himself. How about I show you your room?" the green-haired teen offered. Hatsum tilted her head. "My room? I thought I was going to be sleeping on the couch," Hatsum claimed. The inventor had not seen any excess rooms either beyond Izuku and his mother's. It wasn't a large-sized apartment after all, yet it still held plenty of room. "Well, an important part of resting is having a comfortable place to rest. I should know that better than anyone," Izuku stated. He would never get used to hospital beds for that exact reason. Deku got up from his seat, motioning for his schoolmate to follow him. The 1H student didn't hesitate to abandon her plate of sour food to follow All Might's biggest fan to another part of the apartment. "Wow, you really are a fan of All Might, huh?" Mei could only say that when seeing Izuku's room. It had a lot of memorabilia and merchandise of the retired hero in a lot of places. Midoriya felt immensely embarrassed showing it to her, but the room was nowhere near as bad as it once was. Mostly because Deku had moved a fair amount of his collection into his dorm at UA, something he made mental note to never let Mei see no matter what. Why yeah, I've been a fan of H's since I was little. Izuku nodded, still remembering those days quite well. His admiration for All Might only increased further when he had been told he never would have a quirk. The Greenette just had an unfortunate roll of luck with his genetics. The 1A student snapped himself out of his thoughts when seeing Mei pick up one of the All Might figures. I still remember when I first saw him without the muscles. It felt so surreal. I nearly lost a finger from how distracted I got. Hatsum stated with a small laugh, recalling the last fight of All Mights that nearly took the former #1 hero's life. Deku watched her put the figurine back on the shelf she had gotten it from. The teenage boy didn't imagine her to be actually affected by the fight and subsequent retirement of All Mights. Izuku saw it as just one more person that he had to become the future symbol of peace for. The young boy had plenty already motivating him. He felt it would have been a much harder road to venture down without Hatsum and her babies helping him. You're really okay with me staying in your room? This is your home and I don't mind the couch. Mei questioned her schoolmate. The Zoom quirk user felt guilty, like she was taking major advantage of Izuku and his generosity. The Pinkette didn't want to go pushing it further. She was thankful certainly, but she wanted to be fair. She didn't plan on just lazing around the house all day doing nothing. Mei fully intended to pull her weight while she was here. I want you to actually enjoy a bed for a change instead of some uncomfortable workbench. It'll be good for your back too. Midoriya said, sounding pretty certain on this. It was like he had decided on it before Hatsum had even stepped one foot into his home. That does sound pretty nice. Mei hummed. As much as she loved the support studio, she could not deny, it probably wasn't the best place to basically live in. You try and get some rest, I'm gonna go clean up the kitchen. Izuku said. With that done he began to walk away. Although the 1A student got only 3 steps away, before Deku suddenly felt a pair of arms around him, and then the feeling of an all too familiar feature, of Mei's pressing against his back. She put her face into the crook of his neck. Thank you, Izuku, for being my hero. Hatsum expressed her gratitude. Izuku nodded, trying his best to not shake too much. It's the least I can do for you, Mei. He responded, gently squeezing her hand in response to the feeling of her crushing his chest with that tight hug. Now come on, I'll help. Hatsum let go of Midoriya and began to go on towards the kitchen. The teenage boy knew one thing at least. Both him and the 1H student were excellent at cleaning up after messes. They also were very experienced at causing and attracting said messes. At least an explosion wasn't involved this time. Izuku was more than happy with how things were going so far. Maybe these 2 weeks wouldn't be that hard after all. The two were able to clean the kitchen quite thoroughly. It looked as good as new by the time they were done essentially. Izuku and Mei decided to call it a night shortly thereafter, the young boy taking his place on the couch while his guest stayed in his bedroom. Midoriya was out within minutes of laying down. However, Hatsum had trouble getting to sleep. She had even tried taking some sleeping medication that Deku had the foresight to pick up on their walk home. The Pinkette wasn't used to going to sleep at such an early time. Usually she would work through the nights and days with small naps at most, or energy drinks to keep herself going. Now here the inventor was, at 2 a.m., in a bed that looked like a mess from all her tossing and turning in various positions. Mei had no clue what was going on. It felt nice to be in a bed, she felt comfy, she just couldn't get to sleep no matter what she did. Fuck. Is this a side effect? Mei groaned with her head in the pillow. If insomnia was a side effect of a fractured skull, then the 1H student had an uphill battle to deal with when it came to sleeping better like she was required to. She sat up on her knees in the bed, rubbing her eyes tiredly. Maybe Izuku will have something that can help. Mei murmured, crawling out of the bed and leaving the teenage boy's room. Hatsum could see pretty alright at the moment. Her eyes had more than enough time to adjust to the darkness by now. She saw Midoriya was sleeping on the couch, looking like he was really deep in his slumber. He looks so peaceful when he's sleeping. Mei had to admit aloud, it was just how he was. It was the way the teenage boy was able to take a break from his day-to-day life via the nightly reprise of his dreams. Hatsum felt bad that she considered waking him up, yet she didn't have much choice. Midoriya was the only one that really could help her right now. He was smart enough to always come up with some kind of plan or idea. Izuku. Mei quietly spoke up, though received no response beyond his light snoring. The Zoom quirk user reached down and shook Deku's arm some. He still did not wake up. Come on, Izuku. How heavy of a sleeper are you? I didn't tire you out that much today, did I? Hatsum questioned, not even trying to be quiet or gentle anymore as she continued to shake him by his upper body, while essentially talking to herself. The 1H student had really drained Izuku's energy today. that tended to happen when you scare someone terribly. Izuku had spent a lot of today worrying over his schoolmates' well-being, a lot more than he let on. I need you to just wake up for a minute, that's it? Come on. Mei repeated in frustration. She was out of ideas at this point, or rather at least ideas that didn't involve yanking him off the couch and dumping water on him while praying for the best. After another minute of trying and failing to awaken him, Hatsum found herself on her knees beside the couch. Apparently awakening Midoriya after he's had a long day was a lot harder of a task than she knew. Screw it, I give up. Mei exhaled tiredly, while she laid her head on the same pillow that Izuku was using. The pink-haired inventor looked at his face. Deku seemed to be at peace when he slept. The longer Hatsum stared at him, the most comfortable she felt. The young girl smiled. The 1H student began to drift off to sleep fast while she stared at Midoriya's adorable face. She just focused on Izuku's breathing, her hand resting on his chest as it slowly rose and fell with each breath he took in and out. His muscle babies feel bigger than they did when I first felt them. Mei mumbled, while running her hand across the sleeping Izuku's body. She wondered how much abuse his body had taken over the course of his time at UA. Hatsum made note to improve the protective capabilities of Midoriya's costume the second she got back into the workshop. Had everything changed that much since their time at the sports festival? She barely remembered anything about that day, honestly, other than him. Before Mei knew it, her eyelids began to get heavy despite the position she was in. The teenage girl did not care. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the sounds of her caretaker's breathing. Early the next morning, a short green-haired woman wearing a pretty-looking dress was hurriedly making her way up the steps to the apartment. Oh, I should have just canceled my date the second I found out Izuku was coming home. I can't believe I let myself lose track of time like that. She berated herself. She was Inko Midoriya, Izuku's mother that more or less had raised the boy all by herself. Her husband had not been in the picture in a long while since he took off overseas. Inko had been trying to move on and had only recently made any real progress in that sense. When Inko finally got to her apartment, she wasted no time in unlocking the door and heading inside. Though she so far saw no one there, the woman just assumed that Izuku was asleep in his room. Well, I should get out of my date night clothes and get started on breakfast. I wonder who Izuku brought over. The green-haired woman paused, having been talking to herself, until something suddenly grabbed her attention. It was the sight of Izuku laying on the couch, with a sleeping Mei on top of him. Her head being nestled into the crook of his neck, the blanket being loosely on top of them. Inko stared for a moment. They looked so peaceful and cute, yet that did not change how stunned she was. To the point where she had even let her keys fall to the floor carelessly. I leave him home alone for one night, and my baby boy became a man? Inko blinked. Now she really regretted not canceling date night the moment her only son told her he was coming home from UA for a short time. The middle-aged mother just tried to be optimistic, even if the idea of someone taking her baby boy away from her did make her have mixed feelings. She simply walked away to get out of her clothes from last night, letting the UA students enjoy what remained of their slumber. A short time later, Izuku found himself beginning to wake up. He was feeling a few oddities. A nice warmth was the first thing he noticed, then a weird dampness that he couldn't explain. The green-haired teenager's eyelids fluttered open. That was when he realized what it was. Am I? Deku gasped, realizing Mei was on top of him, drooling on his shoulder at that. He didn't find that too weird. He knew that much was normal from the several times he had found her asleep at her workbench. Though Midoriya had no clue why she was on the couch with him, he remembered falling asleep alone last night at that. Well, at least she looks happy. Izuku sighed, seeing that same crazed smile of Hatsum's on her slumbering face. The young boy didn't want to wake her up, but right now was when he usually got up to train in the morning like he did every day. Deku was strong enough to easily lift Mei up, and move her to the side so he could simply leave her there to rest. That's one way to wake up. Midoriya rubbed his head, looking down at the pinkette that slept before him. The young boy left her there and went to his room, wanting to get ready to do his training routine for the morning. It was pretty much ritual at this point to him. He would only miss out on them if he didn't really have much choice in the matter. Mei probably slept only another 10 minutes after being moved. As she began to reawaken, she looked around in a confused state. How did I get on the couch? She asked herself, the 1H student only remembering coming in the living room last night and then trying to get Izuku to wake up. Hatsum sat up, deciding not to question it, guessing that maybe she had imagined Deku being there at all. Oh, you're awake? The pink-haired teen heard, looking over and seeing Inko standing in the kitchen. The mother was wearing her usual attire, nothing special. Mei tried to keep that bright smile on her face, but was nervous. It was pretty easy and apparent who this green-haired lady before the pinkette was. Ashaya. Hatsum gulped, sweating nervously. Inko couldn't help but smile warmly in response at that. The inventor had to have been spending a lot of time with Izuku to get his same nervous tick of a stutter when scared. Mei was not used to being scared. This was definitely a fear-inducing situation, primarily because she had no clue what to expect from Midoriya's mom. So, are you hungry? We can have a nice talk while I make breakfast. Inko hummed, sounding happy and inviting at least. Yet that aura underneath, the aura of an overprotective mom that even the dull to her surroundings Mei could pick up on, was very prominent. Izuku, where'd you go? Hatsum internally screamed. She was absolutely terrified. Were all mothers this scary? The inventor wouldn't know. If the answer was a yes, then she felt that terror increased tenfold. Mei nodded, getting up from the couch and folding up the blanket she had been left under. Trying to delay this as long as plausible, clearly. Thomas Edison, give me strength. At the moment Izuku was making his way home after his training routine, while it might be very different here than it was in UA. It doubled as a good excuse to have a mini patrol. So far everything seemed fine, thankfully. The aspiring hero even got to see some familiar faces, or at least familiar faces he enjoyed seeing. Izuku heard his cell phone suddenly ringing, the teenager pulling it out and seeing it was All Might calling. He happily accepted the call. Even if Deku knew what this call was most likely about, that did not make him any less nervous. Hey All Might. What's up? You took a 2-week absence? Midoriya my boy, are you insane? All Might rhetorically questioned over the phone, having been informed by Aizawa of what the one-for-all inheritor had signed himself up for. Needless to say, the retired hero would be lying if he said he was surprised. I'm sorry All Might, it's just Mei really needed the help. I thought I could give her a hand to make sure she took better care of herself. Midoriya apologetically spoke, not even trying to deny that his helpful nature made him take up the task with little thought. Do you not trust her parents? By all means, they should be more than capable of caring for her, if the info we have on them is correct. All Might asked his pupil, though the fact that even UA had trouble getting in contact with Mei's parents said plenty. They had sent several notices after all. Apparently the insurance department had gotten a reply and that was it. I don't know anything about Mei's parents. She seemed pretty determined not to go home. I was more scared what she might do if left alone. Izuku stated, with how passionate Hatsum was about her inventions. If someone wasn't keeping an eye on her constantly, she most likely would go right back to work, with or without access to the support studio's workshop. Well, if she's in your care then she should be fine. If either of you require any assistance, don't hesitate to call me. Toshinori said, trying to assure him that he was not alone in this endeavor. That was when something sprung to Deku's mind. He had been worrying about it, but never had a good chance to ask until now. All Might, do you know if Kaken is okay? Ever since he came back from his last hero internship, he's been acting different. Midoriya attempted to inquire as to whether or not his idol knew anything behind Katsuki's odd and rather unprecedented change. Yes, I'm well informed of the circumstances. However, I haven't seen young Bakugo since he last sought my guidance a week ago. The retired symbol of peace sighed. He sounded sympathetic at the mere mention of Katsuki. All this did was make Deku worry further. The 1A student swallowed hard and tried to be brave. Please All Might, tell me what happened. Midoriya reaffirmed his request. If he could help his childhood friend somehow, he would want to know everything to do just that. Even if the Greenette knew Bakugo might use it as an excuse to blow him up later. All Might relented at that. If there was anyone that he could trust this information to, it would be Izuku. As you're aware, he spent his last hero internship with Best Jeanist once again. It went fine mostly, however. On one of the patrols a few villains attacked a moderately sized area. Toshinori began retelling what he knew. Deku just listened with his phone to his ear, as he continued his walk back to his apartment. Jeanist was able to capture them without any trouble. Unfortunately they had damaged a large apartment complex and had caused it to begin collapsing. Bakugo was one of the few assigned to assist in the rescue efforts. He continued, so far it didn't sound too bad to Deku. The one-for-all inheritor wondered if it was just the initial disaster that had affected Katsuki. If so, then that made little sense to him, since they had aided in much larger disaster relief efforts. Kaken on a rescue mission? Izuku had to say that didn't sound like the best of choices. Then again, with controlled explosives that could pierce stuff with relatively minimal damage, maybe it was just Bakugo being assigned the task more as a contingency plan. There weren't any other heroes in that area at that time, so they had to use everyone available while waiting for others to come. The retired symbol of peace continued. It was just a series of unfortunate circumstances all around that led to the situation that transpired. What happened though? That sounds like something Kaken would brag about. Midoriya claimed, now starting to feel the heaviness in his mentor's tone. A woman had been riding in an elevator when the building got damaged. Unfortunately, because of its age, the cables snapped and it plummeted into the basement. Bakugo had been the one to discover her. All Might spoke in further detail. He breathed before continuing. She had been hurt quite severely, but couldn't be carried out due to being impaled on rebar. Izuku knew that had to have been a hard sight to see for the explosive quirk user. There was no such thing as a clean disaster, just one that you always prayed did minimal damage at best. The teenage aspiring hero stayed silent, simply listening. There was no possibility of saving her. She had been on blood thinners because of a surgery she had the week prior. She was purely unlucky. Bakugo stayed with her and comforted her until her final breath. She bled out within 5 minutes. Toshinori finished with that. Apparently it had been just simply a harsh emotional moment for the ash-blonde-haired teen. Poor Kaken. Was all Midoriya really could get out. He never had lost a person in that way. In a sense, it was like failing to save someone's life. It was a lot more painful to know there was no hope in rescuing said life to start with. Izuku couldn't even begin to imagine it, being unable to do anything beyond watch the flame of someone's life swiftly fade away. Indeed. Bakugo came to me reluctantly once he returned from the internship. He had requested a therapist to speak to. I could tell he was ashamed to even ask for it, but if he is changing like you say, then perhaps he's making progress. All Might finished with that. The former #1 hero had not seen or heard from Bakugo outside of class since then, so he had assumed that the explosive quirk user had been doing better. I wish I knew sooner. If I'd have tried to help him. Midoriya muttered, not able to deny that he felt guilty for not noticing a dear friend's distress. Though he also knew that Katsuki would exhaust every option before even remotely considering asking for help. I hate to say this, young Midoriya, but some villains are only able to be fought alone. The UA teacher claimed, and if there was one thing the Greenette was extremely familiar with, it was internal struggles. Deku still felt bad that he couldn't help his childhood frenemy. Sadly, this was just a situation where he could only let Bakugo know that he was there if he needed him. Thanks for telling me, All Might. Sorry I can't talk more. I haven't seen Mom yet and I really don't want Mei to meet her alone. Midoriya apologized. He loved every moment he spent with his idol, whether it be over the phone or in person. That being said, he had assumed that his mother was simply not home yet. It was why Deku had been able to go out and train, even if he did it more so to clear his head from the odd awakening this morning. Oh, is Inko not back yet? That's odd. I dropped her off an hour or so ago. Even texted me to thank me for driving her home. Toshinori worriedly queried, not thinking before he spoke. That was when Izuku paused in place during his walk. His brain wasn't slow to pick up on that sentence whatsoever. Mom's what? You drove her? Wait, why do you have my mom's number? What did you just call her, All Might? Hello? Izuku felt his brain go off in many directions at once, trying to ask multiple questions in a row to his teacher. The only thing he received in reply was the sound of silence. All Might had hung up. So, Mom's friend is All Might. Midoriya held his head with one hand. That was not something he had wished to have discovered over the phone. The more the teenager thought on it, the more confused he became. Wait, he said Mom's been home for a couple of hours? And I left Mei asleep on the couch. Oh no. Izuku connected the dots after some muttering. He began to hurriedly run home. As much as the aspiring hero wanted to just use his quirk to get home instantly, there were just too many people on the sidewalks at the moment to do that safely without risking crashing into others or outright knocking them down. Deku was having a rough morning and he had a feeling it was going to get a lot rougher. The one for all inheritor hoped that Mei was still asleep. He really did not want her to be left in an awkward situation alone with his mom. Mei was scared. She always tried to be optimistic for new experiences. However, this was one that she never had been prepared for. At first things were simple, an exchange of pleasantries followed by an offer of breakfast. Hatsum gladly accepted that, and it was delicious. However, now she was out of defensive buffers and it was just her alone at the table with Inko. Thank you for the food, Mrs. Midoriya. Mei thanked the green-haired woman, guessing Izuku didn't get his cooking skills from her. Oh, there's no need to be formal, you can call me Inko. Inko warmly insisted, setting down her coffee cup. The single mother was being nothing short of welcoming and friendly to the 1H student. Alright Inko. Why you can call me Mei. The Pinkette replied. She was actually nervous enough to be stuttering like Izuku himself. He had clearly rubbed off on Mei in some regards. The only time she ever felt unnerved in any sense was only when there was a risk of a new invention going haywire on Deku, or when one outright did. Did something happen at UA, Mei? Inko didn't seem to have any hesitation with asking questions, especially ones related to her son. He was her world after all. It made the middle-aged woman all the happier when their worlds started expanding. No, nothing happened at UA. I promise. It's just complicated is all. Mei said, not sure if she could really go into detail or not. She was more wondering what all Izuku had told his mother so far from their texting. The Pinkette didn't want to go accidentally undoing a lie the green-haired boy had made. Although the mother and son didn't come off like the type to really keep many, if any, secrets from one another, let alone actively lie to each other. So, how long have you and Izuku been together? Inko popped the question that Mei dreaded the most, and she didn't even try to hide it. Her facial reaction alone gave away how awkward it was. The inventor groaned and laid her head on her arms. Me and Izuku aren't together. He's just acting as my caretaker until I'm better. Hatsum exclaimed. She could tell by the look on Mrs. Midoriya's face that she didn't buy that. Mei couldn't blame her either, she sure didn't believe it herself. Sleeping on the couch with your caretaker helps you get better? Inko retorted, having a small smirk when seeing the Zoom quirk user looking ashamed of herself. That was an accident, I think. Mei murmured. Where was Izuku when she needed him? What kind of training did he do in the mornings that took so long? Then again, the Pinkette knew her caretaker could be easily detained by his heroic nature. Similar to how she could lose hours and entire days working on her creations. There's no need to be embarrassed. I was just poking fun. You seem pretty honest, and anyone Izuku wants to help, I'm willing to help too. Inko assured that there was nothing to be worried about. It wasn't like she was going to threaten to kick Hatsum out at the very idea of her son and the inventor being together. The green-haired woman was just like her son in that sense, weak to those that needed help. I'm starting to think I know where Izuku got his heroic heart from. Mei muttered to herself, once again oblivious to the fact she was even doing it. Once the support gear designer calmed down, she laid back in her chair, feeling emotionally and mentally frustrated. We really aren't together though. The 1H student reiterated, sounding disappointed in just saying that sentence as she stared down at the table. But Inko waited for her houseguest to continue, seeing the girl with the cross-shaped irises finally look directly at her for the first time since breakfast. But I wish we were. Hatsum confessed. She wasn't going to deny the obvious from someone with perception skills so high that it almost came off like a separate quirk. Was this just the power of motherhood? I want to date Izuku. I like him a lot. He's sweet, he's honest, he's probably the best human being I'm ever going to meet in my life. I'd probably be dead by now from one of my many explosions if it wasn't for him. Mei proclaimed. With that said, she rested her head in one hand. I was so wrapped up in making babies for him that I never had time to think about it. Now, here I am with nothing but time, and I don't even have the courage to tell him. Hatsum finished her small ramble there. Although Izuku's mother choked on her coffee at the making babies part, not remotely aware of the context between the two UA students when it came to that. Are you okay? The Pinkette asked, seeing the middle-aged lady nod while catching her breath. She made a mental note to talk with her son later, trying to focus on the current conversation at hand instead of getting distracted. If there's one thing my boyfriend has taught me, it's that nobody lacks courage. Inko began while standing up, beginning to clean up the remnants from their breakfast. It's bravery that people need more of. Ever since the world changed and quirks became the new norm, courage became something everyone needed to have, so it became empty. That's why the hero-to-civilian ratio is so small. Inko stated, as she turned on the sink faucet to let the water begin filling it up. Mei blinked upon hearing that. She never really had considered that factor. 85% of people in the world had quirks, yet only maybe 10% became heroes. It was a strange oddity when one considered that the percentage of quirkless people got lower each generation. You are who you are, you just need to think about how to be brave in your own unique way. Inko finished with that. She seemed pretty wise, almost like that wisdom was coming from someone else entirely. Mei was a lot calmer now than she was earlier. Well, when you put it like that. Hatsum gave a small smile of her own, finally easing up along with any tension that was left in the room. The 1H student felt silly for even being scared of Inko in the first place now. That was when they suddenly saw the front door burst open, revealing a panicked and exhausted-looking Midoriya. I am here. Izuku panted, having had no idea what to expect when he got home. The 1A student was relieved to see everything looked okay. His mom was doing the dishes and Mei was helping clean the table. So, you enter like All Might too? Hatsum gave a toothy grin. Inko had to stifle a laugh of her own when hearing that and failed at doing so. Izuku couldn't help but begin laughing as well, unable to resist really. The 1A student felt relieved, glad to know everything was alright at least. He had no idea what to have been expecting to come in on, and had been dreading the worst. Welcome home, Izuku. I was starting to think you had gotten lost. Inko jokingly welcomed her son home. The teenage boy had no hesitation to go up and give his mother a tight hug. It might be late, that didn't change how happy he was to see her after what felt like ages. Deku had his occasional bouts of homesickness, ever since the students moved into their dorms at UA. Sorry I wasn't here to welcome you home. Izuku apologized. He loved his mother. Inko was the only one he really had in his life for the longest time. Without a father, a quirk, or anything for the longest time, the teenager more or less suffered a lot in his childhood. He had no idea where he would be if his mom had not been there, even if she had never been 100% supportive in his heroic aspirations. Mei just looked at the two longingly. She felt a tightness in her chest as she tried to ignore a feeling that she was very unused to. Jealousy? Desire? The pink-haired teen had a lot of thoughts going through her head at once. Was my mom ever like that? Does it feel nice to be held like that? They look so happy. Is this what a normal family is like? Would it be okay if I joined them? Mei felt all those thoughts and emotions rushing through her head. She had no idea why it seemed like Izuku had a knack for making her reflect. And right now, the 1H student hated the reflection of herself that she was seeing. Imagining her youth, that childhood, Hatsum wanted to treat her past in a similar way to how her parents treated her. As ironic as it sounded, the Zoom quirk user did not know what to think about that. The world was starting to blur around her. She wasn't paying attention to anything but her inner thoughts at that moment. My. Izuku's voice suddenly snapped Mei free of her deep train of thought. She shook it off as she came back to reality, putting on that familiar smile of hers. Sorry Izuku, I got distracted. Hatsum apologized, though upon seeing her schoolmate's face she became confused. Izuku looked worried. That wasn't an unusual expression for him, sure, but the inventor wondered what was wrong. Are you okay? You're crying. Deku asked. Mei blinked in response to that. She reached up and felt her cheek. It was damp. She wasn't even aware of it. Now Hatsum noticed her vision was a bit worse from said tears. I am? Wonder why that is? Hatsum tried to brush it off as nothing, acting like it was just some side effect of yawning too much due to being up late. However, the teenagers saw Inko coming over in a hurry. Izuku, go get the first aid kit please. The middle-aged woman told her son. He nodded, wasting no time in going to do just that. Mrs. Midoriya took Mei to the couch, having her sit down to rest. What's wrong? It's just some water. I'm fine. Hatsum didn't even get to finish her sentence, mainly because Izuku's mother gave her that familiar doubtful expression that made her clam up mid-sentence. Now don't panic, Mei. You're bleeding from your ear. Inko pointed out what was happening. Mei had begun bleeding from her right ear. The blood wasn't much, it was running from her lobe and had dripped down onto her shoulder. The Zoom quirk user didn't even feel it. Do I have to go to the hospital again? Hatsum hesitantly asked. She was starting to really get sick of medical facilities at this point. Now the young girl was feeling guilty for already somehow hurting herself before she was even in the Midoriya household 24 hours. Well, I work part-time as a nurse, so I'm used to treating a lot of things. Inko assured. The second her son returned with the first aid kit, she took it from his hands. Whether or not you need a hospital trip will depend on you telling me everything about what's going on, okay? The glorified single mother requested. The pinkette nodded. It's not much, my head's broken, that's it. Hatsum shrugged. Her caretaker clearly disagreed. Izuku just turned to Inko, guessing he would have to do the talking. The teenage boy really felt bad about leaving them alone now this morning. Deku just wondered how this even happened since Hatsum had been doing better as far as he could tell. It had been 3 days since Mei's ear bleeding incident. Inko, with her limited medical knowledge, had decided that it wasn't enough to go to the hospital over, not yet at least. The part-time nurse understood the situation a lot better now, after hearing from her son about Hatsum's diagnosis and lifestyle improvements that Recovery Girl had insisted upon, even if they were just temporary. Inko was more than happy to help with the dietary aspect of Mei's recovery. It was the least she could do. Though the single mother was simply hoping to aid Izuku by easing his workload, and she did not want to imagine Hatsum and him destroying the kitchen. It was an early Tuesday morning. Izuku was in the living room tying his shoes. The teenage aspiring hero was getting ready to go do his usual training routine, albeit Midoriya was going earlier than usual in hopes of being back before his mom and house guest were awake. That was when the sound of footsteps entering the room caught his attention. Ichim? Oh, good morning, Mei. Izuku greeted the pinkette, seeing her standing there looking exhausted. Mei was wearing a loose black t-shirt and white sweatpants. They had been given to her by Inko as a present yesterday in hopes the more comfortable clothing would help Hatsum sleep easier at night. Sadly, the result was no different to the last 2 days. Morning, Izuku. May flopped down onto the seat next to him, her messy hair being quite prominent at the moment. The teenage boy wondered how she even managed it half the time. Maybe she had a gadget for it? You had trouble sleeping again? Deku quirked, aware that the 1H student had been more or less suffering from insomnia the last few days. May nodded in reply. It perplexed him as to why Hatsum was having trouble slumbering though. She wasn't chugging coffee or energy drinks, and the sleeping medicine should have been plenty to help her drift off to dreamland. At this point, Midoriya was at a loss on the matter. It's really weird, I never had this problem before. I could just lay my head down on my workbench and I'd be out in a second. May exclaimed, she was very much confused by it as well. She put her head in her hands. The young girl never even really paid attention to the feeling of exhaustion back then. Now that Hatsum was actually needing to sleep healthier, she was unable to do it. Did you try sleeping at my desk? Izuku suggested, thinking maybe the Zoom quirk user simply was used to sleeping at a workbench. Yeah, I did, it didn't make a difference though. Oh well, too late to sleep now anyway. May shrugged, giving up with the attempts to slumber for the time being. That was when the Pinkette took notice of her caretaker's attire. Deku looked ready for school almost with how awake and ready he was in comparison to her. You're going out? Isn't it a little early for your training? Hatsum questioned, having gotten a good grasp on Midoriya's schedule at this point. She was wondering what Izuku was doing if not exercising. Although she knew the 1A student was pretty determined when it came to training, almost as much as May herself was with inventing. Yeah, usually I'd go in another hour or two. I just thought I would start doing it earlier so I could be back in time for breakfast. Midoriya responded, seeing May shrug as she laid back on the couch. The Zoom quirk user had initially come to the living room with the hope of getting Izuku's help with sleep, before giving up on that task when realizing the time. You better be careful with the gear you train with, I'm not exactly in a position to repair anything right now. May jokingly warned Midoriya. He gave her a warm smile and light laugh in response. They both had lightened up around one another in the last few days. Normally they had no problem interacting with each other, but being out of their usual environment left the two having to adjust again. Inko certainly made that adjustment period very awkward to get through. I'll try my best, but I can't make any promises. It's just a side effect of getting stronger. Izuku chuckled, assuming he had gotten a good track record for costume and support gear damage. The Pinkette rolled her eyes, guessing she couldn't argue with logic that sounded like it came straight from All Might. That was when May suddenly got an idea in her head, Deku looking worried upon seeing that familiar crazed expression on the 1H student's face. He loved seeing her happy, it was just the spontaneity of it that made him nervous. Hatsum sprung up from the couch, standing before the greenette. That's it. That's the answer. Muscle. She declared. Izuku was not sure what she meant by that. The young boy was happy to see May looking like her old self again. She hadn't shown that crazy smile in the last few days and it had started to make him worry more. Muscle? Are you asking to feel mine? Midoriya blinked, not really minding if that was the case. He suddenly felt May grab him by his shoulders, as her face got close to his within what felt like a millisecond. No, Izuku. I just need a way to burn off my energy. If I can't work with my brain, then I'll just join you for training and work on my muscles instead. Hatsum exclaimed, flexing her arms in a mock gesture as if she was trying to prove her point. Join me in training? I don't know if that's a good idea. Izuku hesitantly responded. It took him a long time to adjust to that workout routine to begin with. He was hesitant about even trying to have May join him in said training, primarily because the entire exercise plan had been made by All Might. Come on. I'm sure you'd love having a training buddy. Besides, it'll make it easier for me to assemble my babies if I'm stronger too. May insisted, trying to offer companionship in exchange for joining him in training. The pink-haired teen knew that the 1A and 1B students either sparred with each other or robots for practice, and that was just for the fighting half of the learning process. The physical part was what currently interested the Pinkette. Well, if you're sure you're up for it. Izuku relented, not really able to say no to May. Especially when she had that energetic expression of hers back. The greenette watched as Hatsum eagerly hopped over the coffee table. Great. I'll be ready in a minute. May called to him as she hurried back to the All Might Fanatic's room that she had been staying in for the time being. Deku didn't even have any chance to respond. By the time it registered what she had said, it was already too late. I guess it'll be nice to have someone to train with again. Izuku confessed aloud to himself. It had been a long time since he had last done his exercise routine with another person. Midoriya was making plans to dial it down some, aware that if they went overboard it would just wind up making Hatsum's body hurt more than her head sometimes did currently. I hope she likes the beach. Deku shrugged, guessing that burning some energy during the day would do May a lot of good. Izuku pondered on the possibility that maybe she could join him on his makeshift patrols too. It would be something like a date. Izuku felt his nerves flare up when the idea of it being a date crossed his mind. It made him happy, sure, but the teenage boy didn't want to do anything drastic before the 1H student was even completely healthy. That is what Deku thought. If the opportunity arose though to do exactly that, he doubted he would be able to ignore it. "Okay, I'm ready," Mei called out, startling Izuku out of his train of thought. He saw his pink-haired schoolmate was wearing her usual attire yet again, much to his surprise. Hatsum really was fast at this. It showed how excited she was at this training idea. It made Midoriya happy, although he knew Mei would most likely hate the exercises by the end of it all. "All right, let's go." Izuku gave a bright smile of his own to match Mei's. With that said, the two left the apartment so they could get started on what Deku was hoping would hopefully be a simple and calm morning. Takoba Municipal Beach Park was a gorgeous place. It was the kind of place most people dreamed of traveling from all over the country to visit. It was romantic, it was beautiful, it was nothing short of a practical symbol of peace of its own with its current environment. It used to be a giant trash dump. The ocean currents would wash in trash that was thrown in the waters carelessly. After a certain point, the trash amounted enough that people decided to start dumping everything there. It had turned a mark of beauty into an abandoned trash pit more or less. Izuku still remembered the first time he came here. All Might said that volunteer work was one of the most important parts of being a hero, no matter how unglamorous the task. Since the younger heroes of the current generation sought fame and fortune, as a result Midoriya had spent nearly a year anonymously cleaning up this beach single-handedly more or less. And now here Izuku was, laying on his back in the sand, enjoying the feeling of the bright early morning sun on his skin. It was part of his routine to bask in the environment after his training. Deku had done it probably 100 times by now. It was like his own personal trophy. Izuku heard a groan. He looked to his left and saw Mei. She was basically sprawled out beside him. The pinkette had gotten through his training regiment, barely. It was not an easy thing by any means. Hatsum was really feeling the burn, to put it mildly. "Maybe I should have toned it down some more," Midoriya suggested, guessing that it had been an intense workout for someone like Mei. She was able to keep up and hold her own during the sports festival. Sure, Izuku guessed that her motivation to show off her inventions had helped Hatsum through any tough spots in the festival. "You haven't even broken a sweat." "How?" Mei groaned in disbelief. Deku looked like it had taken no effort whatsoever to even do these exercises. "This wasn't much really. UA has a lot better areas to practice in," Izuku answered as he stood up. The young boy reaching down and offering the Zoom quirk user his hand, Mei gladly took it and was helped back onto her feet. "You know, when you told me you were going to the beach to train, I didn't know what to expect," Hatsum confessed, stretching once she was back on her feet. The goggle-wearing girl noticed a few vending machines nearby, the 1H student beginning to step over to them with Deku alongside her. "What do you mean?" Izuku quirked. Now the All Might fanboy wondered if she actually was expecting this to be a date in disguise. If that was the case, it relieved him somewhat to know he wasn't the only one that had those thoughts in his mind. Midoriya watched carefully while getting his own drink from the neighboring vending machine, making sure that Mei wasn't trying to go straight for the canned coffee or energy drinks. "I don't know really. You've spent a lot of time in my workshop lately these last few months, and the second I get hurt you're the first one to show up. Every time." Hatsum smiled. She seemed positively aglow at the moment, that made her caretaker be at ease. "I want to ask, what do you see me as?" Mei questioned without much warning. It was something that she had been meaning to ask for a while now. The teenage girl just had no chance to really make the inquiry before now, or at least in a situation that wasn't stressful or full of distractions around them. For the first time in a long time, Hatsum had to stay away from the workshop. Ever since Mei had been suspended from UA, more and more questions had been springing to the 1H student's mind in place of her attempts to keep her head clear. Mei wasn't used to not thinking about creating her babies, and it was hard, but Hatsum was doing as ordered, trying to take it easy on her brain in that sense. "That doesn't sound like something you'd ask." Izuku tried to brush off the question mainly because it felt a little too heavy. He wanted to tell Mei his thoughts and feelings. In most circumstances Midoriya gladly would. His nervousness aside, he had been more or less planning on waiting until the 1H student had received a clean bill of health before he went making any confessions. "Inko said I needed to be braver. And not being in the workshop for once, it gives me a chance to experience new things. Making babies is my life and always will be. But I'd be crazy if I didn't take advantage of the chance this accident's given me." Mei explained her train of thought. It was a pretty positive outlook to have on the circumstances. She didn't hide how much she hated being banned from the support studio though. That much Izuku knew just from her tone when mentioning the workshop. As far as May saw it, if she couldn't do much with her brain at the moment, then she thought maybe now would be a good opportunity to exercise her heart more. Deku could tell how happy the Pinkette was just from saying that. Now he felt unsure for trying to avoid the initial question, plus Izuku could feel his nervousness trying to kick in a lot when thinking on how to answer it. Braver, huh? Well, maybe I should take Mom's advice too. The 1A student considered it, deciding to not be afraid to say what was on his mind. He had put plenty of thought into it after all. Deku thought it was best to be honest then, not just with himself but with May as well. May, you're positive, you're honest, I have a lot of fun learning and working with you, you're reliable and a lot of fun to be around. I love that passion of yours. If it weren't for you, I'd not have had the ideas or ability to perform my new fighting styles even. Izuku began. It actually surprised May to hear him saying all that at once. She had expected him to be kind, yet this was sounding like a lot more than just words of kindness from a fellow schoolmate. I get anxious every time I hear an explosion happened in the workshop while I was in class. I hate seeing you hurt and I feel bad for making you worry whenever I wind up getting hurt while trying to help out. Izuku continued, moving the sleeve of his shirt slightly to show one of his many scars, a small one that was below his right collarbone. The only difference from this scar when compared to the rest on him, was that this one was in an oddly hexagonal shape. Hatsum cringed through her teeth when seeing that familiar injury. That's from the explosion that happened with baby number 935. May muttered. She felt guilty upon seeing it, and embarrassed slightly because she recalled her reaction to when Izuku had first received the injury as well. I still remember how much you cried when I got hurt. Midoriya smiled like it was a fond memory. He saw most of his scars more as trophies of his progression towards becoming a hero. This one, however, he viewed it more like a memento. I thought you had died. There was so much blood. May now looked embarrassed. That was not her proudest moment at all. That terrible image still was burned in her head after that explosion. Izuku had been knocked out and was just lying there with a hole in part of his chest, no less because of where a stray bolt had hit him. Hatsum's brain basically broke down in response to that situation. There was barely any. All of it got absorbed by my shirt. Izuku laughed. His memory of the accident was fuzzy. Being knocked out tended to do that. Deku remembered the first thing he saw when regaining his consciousness was May crying over him, and then her nearly hugging him half to death when he sat up asking if she was okay. I still remember how mad Power Loader was over that. Hatsum exhaled, not wishing to remember that memory any further. She saw it as a painful reality check with workshop safety. Did it reduce her number of explosions though? Not by much. After that incident, she installed shrapnel magnets, as she called them, in the support studio floor. If something blew up during a test while they were on, the fragments would go straight down instead of risking harming those around them further. That's really how you see me? May could only say after that, feeling a tad overwhelmed from hearing that. She had a hunch on Izuku's feelings for her, although the 1H student had been hoping she wasn't imagining it. Midoriya nodded, doing his best to resist that nervousness of his, thankful that he had gotten better at controlling it these last few days. It was sort of a forced requirement between how hands-on May was and with the playful teasing from Inko. Izuku had to reinforce his nerves a lot more than ever. See, could I ask what you see me as? Deku decided to push his luck, mostly to fulfill his curiosity. The aspiring hero was not sure what to really expect from May in that regard. The Pinkette seemed to take her time thinking. By the time she seemed to actually have an answer, she had already finished her entire soda. I think you might be crazier than me sometimes. May's reply made Midoriya pause briefly. He stared at her. Sure enough, the Zoom quirk user was being dead serious. Deku didn't know why, but hearing that from the 1H student of all people stung worse. Half the time I don't even know what happened to you until I overhear gossip from one of my classmates about it. The other half is a big heroic heart that makes you throw away any self-regard you have. May stated. Now Izuku was starting to feel like he was more so being scolded instead of being told what he was personally to her. Deku imagined this probably was something that had been weighing on the inventor's mind for a while, or maybe it was just her usual amount of bluntness when talking. You're sweet, you're comforting, you've pretty much been in all of my explosions lately. And you're cheesy, really cheesy. May continued, smiling at the cheesy comment, though she clearly was not too good at putting her feelings into words. Something that Power Loader told her she needed to work on, and if not that, then to work on how to be tact about expressing them. Hatsum gave up on that fast. You've shown me a whole new line of challenges that I always get excited to tackle. I enjoy working with you, and you're a lot more than just my favorite client and best customer to me now. The Pinkette took in a deep breath. She was tired of beating around the bush. She was tired of seeing Izuku beat around the bush, so she decided, to hell with it, either this would blow up like one of her inventions or become a major success. I see you as the boy I want to do a lot with. A whole lot more than just making babies, for and with. Mei declared, a slight blush being on her face. Izuku was basically a tomato now with how bright red he became in half a second just from hearing that. Hatsum had broken him again. Can we go on a date? I want us to try and be a real couple, even if it's just a label change at this point. Hatsum finally got the question past her lips. She saw Midoriya looking at her with his full attention. He had a lot of thoughts rushing through his head. Izuku could hear a lot of those negative pessimistic questions in his mind trying to break to the forefront. Would this be good for Mei? Could he be a strong enough hero for her? Would he be able to protect her? What if he hurt her? Yes. Izuku shrunk those voices into the back of his head, as he suddenly shouted out the answer, scaring Mei. It took a moment, but she stood up with an eager grin on her face. I mean, yeah, I'd love to go on a date with you. He spoke. Really? Hatsum released a breath she had not even been aware she had been holding. Really? Just, please don't go too fast, okay? I don't think my heart or your brain can handle things going too fast right now. Midoriya replied, seeing Mei playfully pout in reply to the going slowly bit. She understood though, nodding. I can't make any promises, but I'll try. The pinkhead agreed, knowing that going slow was not her specialty. Then again, Mei never had a boyfriend before. Izuku was similar in that regard. They both lacked a lot in the experience department. They had managed alright so far though, so Midoriya hoped the winging it approach would still work. I'll leave the date plans to you because I have no idea what to do for a first date. Hatsum said she was too happy to care. Honestly, Midoriya could bring her right back to this beach for another exercise routine and that would be good enough for a date to her. So much for waiting until she was healed. Izuku thought to himself, though he had no regrets. Things happening faster than he planned was nothing unusual to him. Deku just hoped this wouldn't affect his caretaker status of Mei's for the time being. The 1A student hoped it would be easier to take care of her like this. I'll figure something out. Izuku assured he would handle it, leaving out the fact he was already desperately scrounging for plans in his head. If Deku's brain kept drawing blanks, then he would resort to making phone calls to his friends for ideas. I wonder what I should tell Mom though. She might be less welcoming once she hears the news. Izuku verbally pondered aloud. He felt Mei's hand patting him on the back. Oh, Inko already knows how I feel about you. I, sort of confided in her. Hatsum sheepishly confessed. Her caretaker looked uncertain when hearing that. Izuku knew how supportive his mom could be. It didn't make him any less scared of her though. Don't worry. She already thought we were together. Besides, I didn't tell her everything, just that we made babies together is all. Mei was trying to be comforting, however her new boyfriend gawked at her. Izuku had to double-take that in his head, terrified of that being the truth. Her face basically confirmed it for him, much to his dismay. All Might was making his way to the support studio with an interesting-looking laptop, one of UA's specially designed high-tech security ones, being held under his arm. He looked tired, or as tired as a man that was basically skin and bones could appear. The blonde man was simply greeting the students as he passed by. The retired hero felt like UA wasn't the same without Izuku being there, but he knew that wouldn't last for long. I hope I'm wrong about this hunch. If I am right, it means something a lot worse than what we initially thought. Toshinori thought to himself, more or less having been stuck in his own head for the last 20 minutes. Right now, the former #1 hero needed to have a word with Power Loader. Normally UA would have a different procedure behind this sort of thing, however All Might didn't want to go setting off any alarms without confirmation of some sort. That confirmation is what he was seeking right now. When the Foundational Hero Studies teacher arrived to the support course studio, the students were starting to head out, since their class just had finished. All Might gave them some light general greetings while going past them, stepping into the support studio. Power Loader could be seen cleaning up at the moment. The support course teacher seemed to be used to picking up after classes. Power Loader, I have a matter I must discuss with you. Toshinori spoke up to get his attention. He could tell that Power Loader was demoralized at the moment. Clearly things were not the same in the workshop without Mei, even if the Days Without Incident board was setting a new record. What is it, All Might? Power Loader glanced over his shoulder at the retired hero, clearly not up for chatting too much at the moment. All Might went over to one of the many workbenches, taking a seat at it and brushing aside some of the tools that were in the way, placing the laptop down on the cleared surface. The Iron Claw Quirk user sighed, setting his cleaning tools down before going over to join his coworker at the bench, pulling up a chair and taking a seat beside him. Something has been bothering me ever since I heard of Hatsum's accident. Toshinori began. He opened the laptop and turned it on, beginning to go through the half a dozen passwords it required to even be accessed. That was why most of the faculty hated the secure computers, most just used the regular ones as needed. However, a rumor about a traitor being within UA that leaked critical information out to villains, on several occasions no less, had essentially caused several of the teachers have their guard up constantly. What am I looking at? Power loader quirked, seeing on the laptop screen were several police files, what looked like medical documents, alongside both as well were a few news reports. You're looking at the police and medical reports from the victims of the bus crash, the one Hatsum had been on. All Might claimed, pulling up the first one for the support course teacher to see for himself. It said investigation in process at the bottom, much to his confusion. Nobody died from it, so that's good. Why's there a police investigation on this though? Wasn't it just an accident? Power loader asked, perplexed on why the already stretched thin police would even remotely waste efforts on this. Heroes tended to be the real police, whereas nowadays regular officers were more or less civilian management or for handling the locking up of criminals that got apprehended by said heroic people to begin with. Detectives were ironically more valued than ever in the new quirk-filled world, one of which All Might was good friends with. Initially that was what it was deemed. Until a few oddities popped up. Look at these medical reports. Toshinori switched over to the hospital files. The only reason they were able to see them is they were part of the police report more or less now. Even May's file was there, the list of people was a decent length. All Might, get to the point. I'm not gonna read all this medical jargon. Power loader insisted they cut to the chase. All Might had tried to just go slow, since this might be confusing otherwise. Most of the people that were on that bus had sustained quite grave injuries actually. This wasn't a simple accident, not with the scale of damage that was done between the two vehicles. Toshinori said, beginning to point out some of the more specific injuries that he had spoken of. Power loader looked closer. He was surprised at what he saw on the list. A shattered pelvis, several shredded arteries, crushed chest, a fractured skull, 2 impalements, all of these were listed as being quite fatal. And yet the odd part was the fact that all of the patients were labeled living. The UA teacher thought it might be a mistake honestly, he didn't know much about medicine, but it didn't take a genius to know how dangerous all of those were. It took 3 minutes before heroes arrived on the scene and began to assist. Half of those people should have died within that time or shortly thereafter. Toshinori continued, implying this should have been a far more tragic incident than it turned out to be. So what? Someone with a healing quirk on the bus dash. The Iron Claw quirk user got interrupted before he could continue. Nobody on that bus or the 2 in the garbage truck had healing quirks. By all means, several should have died, yet their injuries did not even take that much treatment either. They were healing the second they got injured, it seems. All Might claimed now it was starting to make sense to Power Loader at least. He watched his blonde coworker pull up the news report. This is from the other day, nothing unusual? And then the police found this one. The retired symbol of peace pulled up the next news article. It looked disturbingly similar to the bus crash, yet the dates were very different. The wrecks looked pretty much the same. What is going on? Power Loader was getting more confused the more he saw. The pictures showed that the 2 bus crashes looked basically the same, even if the photos were taken at different angles, the garbage truck being basically crushed at the front, with the bus laying on its side a few feet away, half caved in at the center with all the windows smashed. The reason an investigation was opened, it's because 2 of the people went missing from the hospital, without much of a trace left. Now, I don't know who they were, but one of the 2 connections they shared was that they were in both accidents. All Might finished at that. He could tell the support course teacher looked exasperated at this point. The main fear they both had was one they did not need to mention. The fear of a quirk that outright had no prior documentation in some way. They had experience with that in some regard. Certainly, someone that was in UA's care currently was able to rewind people more or less, but mutation in quirks was exceedingly rare. The bottom line was that there was no way an incident like this could repeat in such an exact way on accident, without a disturbing amount of attention to detail otherwise. So, why come and tell me? I'm not exactly a beat cop, not really much of a hero these days either. The metal mask-wearing man questioned, getting out of his seat to resume his previous task. It's because of the second connection. Both of them were UA students at one point before our times here. All Might closed his laptop, standing up and looking at his coworker to see his reaction after announcing the second connection. So, what you're telling me is that you think some maniac is out there targeting UA students and trying to make it look like accidents? Power Loader found that hard to believe, really. That was why the dorms had been created though, due to villains attacking the students during training courses. The only reason the support course teacher found it to be a stretch this time was because a villain would take credit for that sort of thing, especially if it meant throwing a shot at UA of all places. No, it might all be circumstantial, and it is just a theory. I fear that they created the accidents as their means of getting a hold of said students. The former number 1 hero began to leave the workshop, stopping in the doorway. But if I am right, it might mean Hatsum is in danger as well. Without proof though, all we can do is hope that is not the case. Power Loader just stayed still after hearing all that, even after his cohort had left the room. He didn't think any of the support corps students would ever be in genuine danger. The Iron Claw quirk user hated imagining this even. Was there truly no facet of the heroic world that didn't have a danger to it? Hatsum will be fine as long as she's with Midoriya. She'll be in no danger. That kid is as passionate as her after all. Power Loader told himself, though that did not assure him much at all. If anything, it just made him more anxious. What could he do though? UA could not go hitting the alarm every time an unconfirmed chance of a student being hurt appeared. They could only react if something actually did happen. Otherwise, they could only stay prepared for any situation that might arise. This is a lot harder than I thought it would be. Izuku groaned to himself. The one for all inheritor had been trying to figure out what to do for his date with Hatsum tonight. He kept drawing blanks though. It had gotten to the point where in his desperation he called some of his friends for suggestions, without letting them know what they were for, or at least that is what he hoped. Kaminari told him about a restaurant he went to once with Jairu. It didn't sound fitting to Midoriya though. He doubted Mei would like it all that much either. She did not seem like the biggest music lover. Deku almost called Mina, before realizing that was not going to end well and instead called Yaoyorozu. Momo suggested something simple like a picnic in a park. Something that wouldn't be too strong or too weak. Izuku liked the idea for that one a lot. Sadly, the weather for the day was not with him on it. Unpredictable rainy showers on and off for the entire day. After that, Izuku took a risk and called Toru, thinking if anyone knew of great places to spend time at, it would be the enthusiastic invisible quirk user herself. He still was trying to decipher all she had said. All Might didn't answer his phone when Izuku tried to call him for advice, and Deku was too shy to even try and ask his mom for help. I feel like my head is going to explode. Midoriya groaned, just falling over on the couch and laying there. The Greenette was alone in the apartment currently. Mei had been dragged out by Inko without much warning. Normally Deku would have been worried, but he had a feeling that whatever it was that his mother wanted, it was something only Mei could handle currently. Wait. Explode. Would Kaken be able to help? Izuku looked at his cell phone again, mentally debating calling his childhood frenemy. He didn't think Katsuki knew anything when it came to romance, let alone places that would be good for dates. Deku knew if he called Bakugo he would have to be straight and honest. The green-haired teen just felt like it was inappropriate timing-wise, especially with what the explosive quirk user had been through recently. On the other hand, maybe Bakugo would appreciate the distraction. Izuku knew that, as much as Kaken didn't want to admit it, he hated being alone. Through their whole life, Katsuki had been surrounded by people that admired him. At UA, a fair few of their classmates didn't hide their contempt for him, but they still held Bakugo's skill in high regard. Well, I don't have anyone else in mind. Izuku hesitantly hit the dial button on Bakugo's contact listing. The 1A student tried to just be ready for the explosive voice to pierce his eardrum. At the moment, Bakugo was walking upstairs carrying a tray with a bowl of soup in his hand. The ash-blonde-haired teen had more or less nothing to do today. Classes were in an awkward spot without Izuku around. Usually 1A and 1B wouldn't go too far into testing or training without all of the students, especially since their trainings were interweaving with testing one another a lot lately. However, unless the missing ones were in trouble with the school, things tended to be scaled back otherwise. Bakugo heard his cell phone ringing. He ignored it and simply hit the mute button, not in the mood to take any calls currently. When the explosive quirk user reached a certain door, he didn't even bother knocking and just grabbed the handle before making his way inside the room. The room looked relatively generic. It looked almost like a standard small apartment with the appearance alone. Lying in the nearby bed was a brunette-haired girl, who was wrapped up in her blankets with gloves on her hands. "Round face, wake up!" Bakugo shouted, getting nothing beyond a groan and a mumble in response. Ochako Uraraka, she could effectively make anything she touched with the pads of her fingers have zero gravity. Which is why she was wearing gloves at the moment. Sleep-floating stuff tended to be nothing short of trouble. "Do I have to flip the mattress to get you up?" Katsuki sat the tray down, pointing his left palm upwards before setting off a small chain of explosions from his hand. "Wah!" Uraraka was awake instantly with a shriek of terror, fumbling out of bed and being tripped to the floor by the half-dozen blankets she had been laying under. "Katsuki? What was that for?" Ochako relaxed when realizing it was just Bakugo. Again, she didn't even care about the fact he entered without permission. because that was just what Katsuki did the second he lost the straw draw and got assigned to being her caretaker when she fell sick. Because you're even heavier of a sleeper than me when you're sick. Katsuki replied, helping Uraraka sit up in front of her table. At least she had landed in front of the table her lunch was on. She pouted in frustration while seeing the explosive quirk user step off to the side to pick up the mess from her bed. How are you feeling today? Bakugo queried while remaking the bed. Ochako still was not used to hearing him of all people ask that question. If anyone else in their class heard it, they would have thought something terrible had happened. Katsuki had been acting normal around everyone, except Uraraka and Deku. I'm fine, I just wanted to sleep the rest of this off. I told you that last night. Uravati repeated what she had said yesterday, throwing her gloves aside and looking at the soup in front of her. It looked nothing short of delicious. And I told you, you won't get any better unless you actually eat and stay a little active. Bakugo retorted, having essentially been Ochako's personal chef the last week or so. He didn't care about cooking much, but when she started having trouble keeping anything down, Katsuki had to start making special dishes that wouldn't give her stomach more problems than it had been dealing with. I'm still mad at you. Uraraka gave up arguing. She would probably still be a lot sicker than she was at the moment if it hadn't been for Bakugo. She was grateful for him even if they fought a fair amount. Every time that fight would end with those words, a playful, I'm still mad at you. Katsuki hated to admit it, he always had a big toothy grin when hearing those words. It was always funny to him, seeing that puffy-faced classmate of his trying to be adamant or stubborn, and failing in every regard. This is delicious. I still can't believe how good of a cook you are. Ochako's tune basically changed the instant she tasted the first spoonful of the soup. Bakugo shrugged the compliment off. It's called following the instructions on the label. He rolled his eyes, going over and opening the blinds to the room to let some light in, what little was available given the heavily cloudy sky at the moment. Afterwards he went and took a seat on the other side of the table, opposite from Uraraka. Ichim? Ichi again? The explosive teen felt his phone vibrate again. That was the fourth time now. He pulled it out, glaring down at the caller ID and seeing it was Deku calling him again. The greenette had been attempting to get a hold of Kaken for what felt like half an hour now. Go ahead and answer. It might be important. Ochako said, just focused on enjoying her lunch at the moment. The explosive quirk user sighed, not arguing against her as he answered the call. What the fuck do you want, Deku? Katsuki growled his answer out. The high-scoring 1A student noticed Uraraka staring intently at him while she was eating, like it was personal entertainment to her, much to his irritation. Ashikekon. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need your advice. Izuku wasted no time in admitting his need. The greenette never was the type to deny help when he needed it, and right now he was desperate for it. You need MY advice? Katsuki had to repeat that out loud. That was not what he expected to hear today or ever really. Ochako blinked, simply keeping quiet while eating and not so subtlety listening in on the ash-blonde-haired teenager's phone call. Yes, I do. Hatsum asked me out, and I need a good place to take her for our first date. Midoriya firmly stated, not even trying to hide anything. Bakugo felt like he was in an awkward spot now. Uraraka was sat right across from him after all, and last time the explosive quirk user checked, the brunette had a not-so-secret crush on Izuku. The only one in the class who didn't seem to know about it was Izuku himself. He was very dull when it came to picking up on hints. It didn't help that Ochako was pretty bad at giving any hints as well. I don't know, have you considered cooking at home maybe? Katsuki sarcastically advised. He swore he could feel his frenemy's pain through the phone. Please Kaken, I want to give this relationship a chance, not ruin it before it even begins. Izuku pleaded. If he had to even step into a kitchen to cook stuff again, he would die of shame, if embarrassment didn't get him first. Fine, try the mall in the Kiyoshi ward. Bakugo leaned back, resting against Ochako's bed. The Kiyoshi ward shopping mall was a place that was renowned for all the stores inside. They all catered to the various unique types of quirks out in the world, usually via clothing or items to help with said quirks. It was a place where anyone could find anything for clothes really, even being able to put in custom orders if need be. Why there? Mei doesn't really care much for the clothes she wears. Izuku quirked curiously. Katsuki stared out the window of Uraraka's room. It had started raining yet again. There's a small cafe at the back of it. Ishido dragged some of us to it a few months back. Bakugo exhaled. Ochako was wondering why he looked so solemn at that moment. How serious could this conversation be? The brunette felt flattered almost with how the normally explosive teenager was able to be open and relaxed around her. It's really beautiful on rainy nights. Bakugo finished, ending the call on that note before half-heartedly tossing his phone on the table. The teenage boy watched the rain running down the window. It felt very peaceful to him. Katsuki? Are you okay? Ochako worriedly came over to him. She was scared that perhaps the ash-blonde-haired boy had gotten sick with the same disease she had been dealing with for the last week now. I'm fine, Cheeks, just tired. I haven't had a good night's rest in a month. Bakugo dragged his hands down his face. He was tired. Every time he went to sleep, he would be back in that building, that basement, only to reawaken in a cold sweat. There had been a plethora of things in his head since that incident. Katsuki was just relieved when he stopped hearing that crying in his head. Why not? I haven't ever seen you acting, not angry like this. Uravity pressed further. The explosive quirk user rolled his eyes and looked away from her. Bakugo was uncertain what he should say in reply to that. Really? I've had a lot on my mind, alright? Now shut up and get back in bed if you're done eating. Bakugo tried to force his usual amount of rage out of his vocal cords. Ochako wasn't buying it. She had an unamused expression on her face. Katsuki didn't want to have this conversation. He was honestly debating in his head just blowing up the floor he was sat upon and praying whoever's room he fell into below wouldn't be too annoying. That was when he remembered he had the perfect defense. Deku got himself suspended for 2 weeks. Katsuki blurted out with a smug smile, almost looking proud with the announcement. Ochako didn't buy that either. She thought he was lying just to distract her. Uravity didn't see Izuku getting himself suspended even on accident. She thought on it momentarily, before abruptly grabbing her classmate's face with her hands and forced him to look her in the eyes. Tell me the truth. Uraraka demanded, trying to put on her best tough face. Oh. Let go of my cheeks. Bakugo grabbed her face in response. He didn't expect her to feel so much like a marshmallow. Stop calling me Cheeks. Just because I'm taking care of you, doesn't mean I won't blow you up. Try me. You'll go spinning around the room. Wait, you're already making me float. Put me down. Not until you talk to me. Put me down.